Hey guys, tonight we are going to leave our world of midnight snacks and last-minute food deliveries behind. We're going to step through a heavy, time-worn or into a place where food wasn't sustenance, but a spiritual exercise. A very, very bland spiritual exercise. We're diving deep into the not-so-delicious world of medieval monasteries to figure out why, for the average monk, the food well and truly sucked. Spoiler alert, you're not going to enjoy the menu, but the journey is what counts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly makes these late-night sessions possible. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where in the world we're all gathered. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in the tavern is thick with the smell of roasting meat, spilled ale, and damp wool. This, right here, is your last supper. Not in a biblical sense, of course, but it's the last meal you'll have as a free man in the secular world. Tomorrow you enter the Abbey of Street, Alban, and your life will be measured not in seasons or market days, but in prayer bells and fasting schedules. You tear off a piece of dark, crusty bread and dip it into the pool of gravy on your wooden plate. A slab of roasted pork, its skin glistening and crackling, sits beside it. This is a luxury, a final indulgence. You chew slowly, trying to memorize the sensation, the rich, fatty flavor, the salty crust, the satisfying resistance of the meat. You wash it down with a gulp of strong, cloudy ale that warms your chest. Outside, the world is a chaotic symphony of shouting merchants, laughing children, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Inside this bubble of warmth and noise, you are contemplating silence. Why are you doing this? Maybe you're the second son of a minor lord. Your older brother gets the land, the title, and the future. You get a choice, the sword or the cross, and after a brief, unpleasant stint as a squire, you've decided the quiet contemplation of the monastery is preferable to the messy reality of the battlefield. It's a common path, a way for society to handle its surplus of noble sons. This is a well-established fact of the era, primogeniture. The system where the firstborn inherits everything, shaped countless lives, pushing younger siblings into the arms of the church. You run a hand through your hair, still thick and unruly. You think about the tinsor you'll receive tomorrow, that symbolic circular haircut that will mark you as a servant of God. It's a physical sign of renouncing worldly vanity. A strange little known detail is how specific this haircut could be. Different monastic orders had slightly different styles of tinsor, a sort of holy brand identity. Some shaved the whole head, leaving a fringe of hair, while others, like the one you're joining, favored the classic bald spot on the crown. It's meant to be a crown of humility, but right now, it just feels like one more thing you're giving up. You take another bite of pork. Is this decision really born from piety, or from a lack of better options? Are you running towards God, or simply running away from a world that has no clear place for you? It's a question you can't quite answer. And it's a debate that historians still have today. They argue endlessly about the true motivations of the thousands of men and women who joined monasteries. Was it overwhelming faith that drove them, or were social and economic pressures the real force pushing them through those stone gates? For many, the answer was likely a complicated, messy mix of both. The last piece of meat is gone. The ale pot is empty. The sounds of the tavern begin to feel distant, alien. You pay your coin, nod to the innkeeper, and step out into the cool evening air. The monastery sits on a hill overlooking the town, a dark, silent silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Each step you take towards it feels heavier than the last. The laughter and life of the town fade behind you, replaced by the crunch of your own boots on the path and the whisper of the wind. You stand before the great oak door, its iron studs like cold, blind eyes. You raise a fist and knock. The sound is swallowed by the stone. After a long moment, a small wooden slot slides open, and a pair of eyes peer out. Then, with a groan of old wood and the shriek of protesting hinges, the door opens just enough for you to slip through. It closes behind you with a deep final thud. The world you knew is gone. Welcome to your new home. The door clicks shut, and the silence is so absolute it feels like a physical weight pressing on your ears. The brother who let you in, a stooped figure with a face like a worn map, doesn't speak. He simply gestures with a bony hand, leading you down a long, cold stone corridor. The only light comes from narrow windows high above, casting long, dusty rectangles on the floor. Your boots, which seemed so quiet on the path outside, now echo with an embarrassing loudness. You try to walk on your toes. Your ear led into a vast, high-silencing room. This is the refectory, the dining hall. Long, dark wooden tables are arranged in neat rows, with simple backless benches on either side. There are no decorations, no tapestries, no splashes of color, just bare stone walls, a large, stark crucifix on the far wall, and the faint, clean scent of beeswax from a few lit candles. Dozens of men in dark, hooded robes are already seated, their hands tucked into the sleeves of their habits. Their stillness is unnerving. It's like walking into a painting. A bell rings somewhere in the distance, a clear, piercing sound that cuts through the hush. As if activated by a switch, every figure moves in perfect unison. They rise, bow their heads, and a low, melodic chant fills the room. It's a prayer of thanks, sung in Latin. You stand awkwardly, trying to mimic their posture, feeling like an uncoordinated child in a room full of dancers. The chant ends as abruptly as it began, and with a soft scrape of wood on stone, everyone sits, heavier than before. Then the meal begins. Younger monks, the novices, move with quiet efficiency from the kitchens, carrying large wooden bowls and baskets of bread. A bowl is placed before you. You look down into it. There is no roasted pork here. Instead, you see a grayish, lumpy substance of indeterminate origin. A few sad-looking beans and what might be pieces of turnip float in the thick gruel. Steam rises from it, carrying a scent that is not so much unpleasant as it is profoundly uninteresting. It's the smell of mere survival. A hunk of dark, heavy-looking bread is placed beside your bowl. This is it. This is your dinner. Just as you reach for your spoon, the only utensil besides a small knife, a single voice breaks the silence. It comes from a raised pulpit in the corner of the room, where a monk stands before a large open book. He begins to read in a steady, disembodied drone. This is the lector, the designated reader for the meal. The mainstream understanding of monastic meals is the silence, but the reading is the whole point. The rule, established by Benedict centuries ago, was that while the body was being fed, the soul must be fed as well. So at every meal, scripture would be read aloud. It was a spiritual practice, not a potluck. You take your first spoonful of the pottage. It's warm, mushy, and has almost no flavor. You can identify the texture of boiled barley on the earthy grit of some root vegetable. The bread is dense and requires serious chewing. As you eat, the lector's voice drones on, reading from the book of Isaiah. The words wash over you, but you can't focus. You are acutely aware of every other sound in the room, the gentle scrape of spoons against wooden bowls, the soft rustle of a rope, a muffled cough from the far end of the hall. Someone near you swallows with a loud gulp, and you feel a strange sense of shared humanity in that small, embarrassing noise. The loudest thing in the room is your stomach's internal monologue, which is mostly just complaining. A curious and rather unfortunate detail about the lector is that he didn't get to eat with everyone else. He had to perform his duty for the entire meal and would only get his own food and drink afterwards, often alone. It was a position of honor, but also of sacrifice. He was literally nourishing others before himself. You find yourself wondering if this enforced silence actually works. Does it truly elevate the minds of these men to a higher spiritual plane? Or does it just make dinner an intensely awkward and lonely affair? Historians and theologians still debate the psychological effects of such rigid discipline. The ideal was that the silence would prevent idle gossip and gluttonous chatter, turning a simple meal into an active meditation. But the reality for the human beings in the room must have been more complex. Did their minds wander to memories of past feasts, like the one you just had? Did they find ways to communicate with their eyes or with tiny, subtle gestures? It's hard to imagine that the rule could completely extinguish the basic human impulse to connect, especially over food. The lector's voice stops. The last spoonful of pottage is gone. The bell rings again. In unison, the monks rise, perform another brief prayer, and then file out of the refectory in the same ghostly silence they entered in. The entire event took maybe 20 minutes. Yuri left standing by the empty table, your bowl scraped clean but your stomach feeling hollow. It wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual, a test of discipline. And as you walk back down the cold, echoing corridor, you feel a new kind of hunger, not just for more food, but for the simple sound of a shared laugh or a friendly word. You now understand that in this place, silence is the main course. The next morning, you're awoken before dawn by the same insistent bell. There's no gentle sunrise, no slow stretching into consciousness. There is only the bell, the cold floor beneath your feet, and the shuffling sound of other men rising in the dormitory. After the first of many daily prayers, you are summoned to the chapter house. This is a formal meeting room where the monastery's business is conducted and, more importantly for you, where you will be formally introduced to the rules that will now govern every waking moment of your life. The abbot, the head of the monastery, sits in a large stone chair at the head of the room. He is an imposing figure, not because of his size, but because of the absolute authority he radiates. He doesn't speak to you directly. Instead, he nods to another monk, who unrolls a heavy parchment scroll. This, you learn, is a copy of the Regule of Benedict, the Rule of Saint Benedict. This isn't just a guidebook, it's a spiritual and legal constitution, written in the 6th century, and it is the unshakable foundation of your new existence. The monk begins to read selections from the text, his voice echoing in the solemn space. You hear about the vows you will take: poverty, chastity, and obedience. You hear about the schedule of prayer, the opus dei or work of God, that divides the day and night into 8 canonical hours, from matins in the dead of night to compline after sunset. But your ears perk up when he gets to chapter 39 on the measure of food. This is the core historical knowledge, the very text that dictated your diet. The rule is surprisingly specific. It states that to cook dishes should be sufficient for the daily meal. The idea was to provide variety, so that he who for some reason cannot eat of the one may make his meal of the other. It sounds reasonable, almost considerate. Then comes the fine print. A pound of bread per day for each monk. A little over a half-liter of wine or ale. The hymena is permitted, but Benedict strongly encourages abstinence from it, if possible. He writes, with a touch of wearyism, we read that wine is not for monks at all. But since in our day monks cannot be convinced of this, let us at least agree to drink sparingly. It's a 1500-year-old shrug of resignation. You listen, trying to absorb the sheer level of control this ancient text will have over your stomach. It dictates not just what you eat, but how you think about eating. Chapter 40 discusses the measure of drink, and Chapter 41 details the times for meals, aligning them with the seasons and the liturgical calendar. It's a complete system, designed to subordinate the body's desires to the soul's needs. Then you hear a small, almost bizarre detail that snaps you back to attention. The rule mentions figs and a small fish, apiciculus, as possible additions to the meal. This seems oddly specific. Why a small fish, why figs? It's a tiny, peculiar detail that humanizes the otherwise austere document. Scholars suggest These might have been local staples where Benedict was writing in Italy, or perhaps they were seen as humble, non-indulgent treats. It's a reminder that even in this grand, sweeping plan for spiritual living, there were small, practical realities. You imagine a monk 1500 years ago thinking, okay, 2 cooked dishes, but what about a fig? Can I have a fig? As the reading continues, you begin to grasp the underlying philosophy. The goal is discretion or moderation. It's not about starving the monks, but about eliminating gluttony and luxury. The food is meant to be sufficient, but never delightful. It's fuel for a life of prayer, not a source of pleasure. But here's where the academic controversy lies. Historians are still locked in a debate about how strictly this rule was actually followed, and how it was interpreted over the centuries. Some argue that the rule was an ironclad blueprint followed to the letter in well-managed monasteries. They point to archaeological evidence of simple kitchens and the remains of humble diets. Others contend that it was more of an ideal, a set of guidelines that were constantly being adapted, bent, and sometimes outright ignored, especially in wealthier and more powerful abbeys. Did the abbot, for instance, eat the same two bland dishes as you, a lowly novice? The rule says he should, dining with the guests. But human nature and power dynamics suggest there was likely a spiritual loophole or two. The text itself provides a foundation, but the lived reality in hundreds of different monasteries across Europe over 1,000 years was almost certainly a spectrum, ranging from extreme austerity to surprising comfort. The reading finishes. The scroll is rolled up. The abbot looks at you, his gaze steady. He doesn't need to ask if you understand. Your presence here is your answer. You are now bound by these words, written by a man who has been dead for a millennium. You walk out of the chapter house and back into the cloister's rhythmic life, the rules echoing in your mind. 2 cooked dishes, 1 pound of bread, a small measure of drink. It sounds so simple on parchment, but as your stomach gives a low, mournful rumble, you suspect the reality will be much, much harder to swallow. The bell for the midday meal rings, and you file back into the refectory, the great silent hall. This time, you feel a little less like an outsider and a little more like a prisoner who's starting to learn the routine. You take your seat, hands tucked in your sleeves, posture as straight as you can manage. The prayer is chanted, the lector takes his place, and the novices begin to serve. The same lumpy pottage appears, accompanied by your ration of dense bread. As you start to eat, you realize something. Your water cup is empty. You look around. The other monks have their cups filled with water or the thin, pale ale you've heard about. You, however, have nothing to drink. How do you fix this? You can't speak. Shouting, "Hey, can I get a drink over here?" would be a spiritual catastrophe, likely earning you a penance of bread and water for a week. This is where you discover the second, unspoken language of the refectory, the signal OQNDI, or the monastic sign language. It's a complex and surprisingly extensive system of gestures designed to allow for basic communication without breaking the sacred silence. This wasn't just some casual, made-up-on-the-spot charades, it was a formal, codified system. The famous Abbey of Cluny, in the 11th century, had a list of over 100 distinct signs. You subtly watch the monk next to you. You see him catch the eye of a serving novice. He then performs a small, deliberate gesture. He raises his hand, forms his fingers and thumb into a C shape as if holding a cup, and then brings it towards his lips. It's the sign for drink. The novice nods, glides over, and fills his cup. It's a moment of silent, efficient communication that feels both wonderfully practical and deeply strange. Now it's your turn. You try to catch a server's eye, feeling a flicker of the same anxiety you'd get trying to flag down a busy waiter in a restaurant. Finally, a young novice looks your way. You hesitate for a second, then mimic the gesture you saw. You make the C shape, bring it to your mouth. Success. The novice understands and brings the pitcher. As he pours, you feel a small, ridiculous surge of triumph. You've just successfully ordered a drink without speaking a word. The variety of these signs is a well-documented piece of monastic life. What bread you make a circle with your thumb and two fingers, because a loaf is round. For fish, you wave your hand flat, like a fish's tail swishing through water. For cheese, you press the palm of one hand against the palm of the other, as if using a cheese press. There were signs for eggs, milk, vegetables, and even for specific kinds of fish, like salmon or eel. But here's the quirky, slightly absurd detail: there were also signs for things you weren't supposed to have. For instance, the sign for meat the forbidden flesh of four-legged animals was often made by pinching the flesh of your own hand. This wasn't for ordering it, of course, but for discussing it in theological contexts, or perhaps for referring to the portion set aside for the sick. There was even a sign for the abbot's special wine, which usually involved pointing to your own nose, a reference to its superior aroma. It's a little telltale sign that everyone knew the good stuff was being kept somewhere else. You look down at your bowl of pottage. It's as bland as ever. Is there a sign for salt? You've seen none, but you did give a day's bread ration for just a pinch. You see another monk make a gesture. He rubs his thumb and forefinger together, as if sprinkling something. Salt. You eagerly copy the sign, but the novice just gives a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. No salt for you today. Apparently. Your disappointment is a sharp, private little sting. This brings up a question that historians and linguists still ponder. How expressive could this sign language truly be? Was it purely functional, limited to the vocabulary of the dinner table, or did it evolve into a more nuanced form of communication, allowing for jokes, complaints, or even gossip to be passed silently across the refectory? The official lists of signs that survive are mostly practical. They list nouns: bread, fish, wine. But human beings are endlessly creative. It's hard not to imagine two young novices, bored during the lecture's long drone, developing their own private signs: a subtle eye roll for a particularly bland pottage, a quick gesture to mock the snoring brother at the far table. These secret, unofficial signs would never have been written down, so their existence remains a tantalizing what if. We have the official dictionary, but the slang, the inside jokes, are lost to time. You finish your meal, your thirst quenched, but your craving for flavor entirely unanswered. As you file out of the refectory, you realize that the silence you're sworn to isn't empty. It's filled with a hidden language, a ballet of hands and fingers that keeps the machinery of the monastery running. It's another layer of discipline to master, another way in which your old impulsive self is being sanded down and reshaped. And you now know that if you want something in this new world, you can't just ask for it. You have to learn how to sign for it. A few weeks have passed. The rhythm of the bells and prayers has started to feel less like a disruption and more like the very pulse of your life. You've learned the basic signs for food and drink. You can find your way around the cloister without getting lost. And you've even started to recognize some of the Latin chants. But there's one aspect of your new life that you just can't get used to: the pottage. It is the beginning, middle, and end of almost every meal. It's a thick, hearty, and soul-crushingly monotonous stew of grains, beans, and whatever vegetables are in season. The main historical ingredient was usually barley or oats, thickened with breadcrumbs, forming a base that could be added to indefinitely. Its official name is pottage, from the Old French potage, meaning that which is cooked in a pot. A simple, honest name for a simple, honest food. But you've started to call it the eternal simple. Today, as you peer into your bowl, you see the familiar grayish mass. You can pick out some lentils, a few bits of leek, and the ever-present barley. But you also notice something else. A faint, slightly sour undertone that was there yesterday. And is that a piece of carrot from last week's meal? You're beginning to suspect a horrifying truth about the pottage, a truth centered on the massive cauldron in the monastery kitchen. After the meal, your duties take you to the scullery. adjacent to the kitchen. And there you see it. The heart of the monastery-esque culinary operation, a gigantic iron cauldron, big enough for a man to curl up in, suspended over a permanently glowing bed of embers. A kitchen brother, his face slick with sweat, is stirring the contents with a paddle the size of an oar. HES not cleaning it. HES adding to it. He dumps in a bucket of freshly chopped turnips and a sack of barley. The new ingredients disappear into the bubbling, murky depths of the stew that was already there. This is the grim reality of the perpetual stew, or pot au feu. While not every monastery practiced this, it was a common and practical method in large communal kitchens. The main pot of pottage was rarely, if ever, fully emptied and scoured clean. Why waste the fuel to bring a huge new pot of water to a boil every single day? It was far more efficient to simply keep the fire going and top up the existing stew with new water, grains, and vegetables. This meant that remnants of yesterday's meal and the day before's and the day before that's were constantly being mixed in with the new. This practice gives the pottage its unique character. It's a culinary time capsule. Each spoonful is a taste of the immediate present today's additions and the distant past, the lingering molecules of last Tuesday's beans. This leads to a rather bizarre and unappetizing bit of food science. The constant simmering and the acidity from certain ingredients, like stale bread or ale used for liquid, would have acted as a weak preservative, preventing the whole thing from going truly rotten. But it also created a distinct, sourdough-like tang that grew stronger over time. You've been eating a living food, a culinary ecosystem that has been evolving for weeks, months, or who knows, maybe even years. The debate among food historians on this topic is fascinating. Some argue that the idea of a truly perpetual stew that lasted for years is likely an exaggeration, a bit of folklore. They propose that while the pot was scrubbed daily, it would have been cleaned out periodically for practical and hygiene reasons. No one wants to find a fossilized bean from the previous abbot's tenure in their lunch, but other historians contend that in certain large, continuously running institutions, the principle of the perpetual pot was very real. They argue that the slow simmering, high acidity environment could indeed have kept the stew safe to eat, if not particularly delicious for extended periods. The true age of the average monastic pottage is one of those questions we can't definitively answer. There are no surviving pots of medieval stew to carbon date, unfortunately. You watch the kitchen brother stir the great cauldron, his movements slow and practiced. He seems untroubled by the swirling vortex of culinary history, HES ending. To him, this isn't a science experiment or a historical curiosity. It's just dinner. It's the reliable, unchanging center of the monastery's physical life. It's the fuel that will 100 men to get through another day of prayer, work, and contemplation. As you turn to leave, a thought strikes you. The pottage is a metaphor for the monastery itself. It's a continuous tradition, with new novices being added to a system that has been simmering for centuries. Each new addition changes the flavor slightly, but the fundamental character of the stew remains the same. The past is never discarded, it's just charred into the present. It's a profound and beautiful idea, but as you head towards your next duty, your stomach crumbles, and you can't help but wish for a fresh start. Just once, you deal like a meal that wasn't carrying the baggage of last week. Your day is structured by work as much as by prayer. The Benedictine motto is ora et labor et pray and work, and you've discovered that the work part is taken very seriously. Your current assignment is in the bakehouse, a place that is blessedly warm and filled with a smell that, for once, is genuinely pleasant, the scent of baking bread. The master baker, a burly monk with flour permanently dusted on his eyebrows, hands you a heavy sack of grain. Your job is to haul it to the mill, a small stone building by the river that runs through the monastery grounds. As you lug the sack, you think about bread. In the world you left behind, bread was just something on the table. Here, it is everything. It is the staff of life, the bulk of your calories, and the most reliable part of your diet. The bread is solid, dependable, and blessedly consistent. The rule of street. Benedict, as you'll recall, allocates a generous pound of bread pan, this librona to each monk per day. This was a significant amount of food, the foundational pillar of the monastic diet. This isn't a side dish, it's the main event. It provided the carbohydrates and energy needed for long hours of manual labor and the physically demanding schedule of prayers which required standard periods. But the bread of the monastery is not the light, airy loaf you might be imagining. You've been eating it for weeks now, and you know its character well. It's a dark, dense, and seriously chewy affair. The flour used for the daily bread, the pan is conventual, as was often made from a mix of grains, not just wheat, but also barley, rye, and sometimes even oats or ground beans. It was coarsely ground, retaining much of the bran and germ, which made it nutritious but also gave it a rough, almost gritty texture. Back in the bakehouse, you watch the process. The dough is mixed in huge wooden troughs. There's no fancy kneading machine, just the strong arms of two young monks, their robes tied up, methodically unfolding the heavy, sticky mass. They use a sourdough starter, a living leaven that has been kept alive for generations, passed down from one baker to the next. This gives the bread its characteristic tangy flavor in its dense crumb. A fascinating little detail of monastic life is that there wasn't just one type of bread. While you and the other common monks ate the standard dishutar cloth, there were other, finer breads produced for specific purposes. There was pan is our migorum, slightly better quality bread for the monastery's lay servants and workers. And then there was the most prized loaf of all, the pan is dr effecto rio, or sometimes called pan is albus white bread, made from finely sifted wheat flour. It was soft, light, and reserved for the sick in the infirmary, for esteemed guests, and, as you're starting to suspect, for the abbot's private table. The existence of this good bread was an open secret, a constant, flory reminder of the subtle hierarchy that existed even in this community of supposed equals. You start to see the bread as a symbol of your place in the world. You are the coarse, dark loaf, sturdy, functional, and unrefined. The abbot, the visiting bishop, the wealthy patron, they are the soft white bread, a delicacy to be enjoyed. It's a bitter thought, and you push it away, focusing on the rhythm of the work around you. The debate among historians here is about the exact nutritional value and composition of this daily bread. Chemical analysis of archaeobotanical remains, that is, ancient seeds and grains found at monastic sites, helps us understand what they were growing. But how did they mix it? What was the ratio of wheat to barley? How did the quality of the bread in France and a small, struggling priory in the north of England, the pound of bread allocated by street Benedict was a guideline, but the reality was shaped by local agriculture, harvest success, and the monastery's wealth. Some argue that for many monks this bread, combined with the pottage, would have constituted a reasonably balanced, if boring, diet. Others suggest that in lean times, the bread might have been bulked out with anything from bean flour to ground acorns, making it a barely palatable source of calories. The baker gestures for you to help. Your task is to shape the risen dough into round loaves. You flour your hands and dig in. The dough is alive, warm and elastic. You work it, punch it down, and form it into a neat round, placing it on a wooden peel ready for the great brick oven. There's a simple, honest satisfaction in the work. You are contributing to the very substance that will keep your brothers alive for another day. Later, in the refectory, you take your ration of the bread you helped make. You break off a piece. It's still slightly warm. The crust is thick and hard, the inside dense and moist. You dip it into your pottage, the bread soaking up the thin broth. The flavor is familiar, earthy, and sour. It's not delicious, but as you chew, you feel a sense of connection to it. You hauled the grain, you shaped the loaf. This isn't just a faceless ration anymore. It's the product of your own labor. Personal way, the bread has become your true partner, your most constant companion in this quiet, disciplined world. It's a Tuesday. As you sit in the refectory, your spoon hovering over the ever-present pottage, a question that has been nagging at you for weeks comes to the forefront of your mind. Why is the diet so relentlessly vegetarian adjacent to understand the principles of humility and avoiding luxury, but the complete absence of meat feels like a particularly harsh restriction? What was so spiritually dangerous about a piece of mutton or a slice of beef? After the meal, during your study period in the scriptorium, you seek out one of the older, more learned monks. In hushed tones, for even in the scriptorium, silence is the general rule, though quiet scholarly discussion is sometimes permitted. You ask him, why is the flesh of four-legged animals forbidden? The old monk, Brother Michael, looks up from the manuscript, HES painstakingly copying. He explains that the prohibition comes directly from chapter 39 of the Rule of Street, Benedict. The key line, which you now vaguely recall from your introduction, reads Carneum vero quadrupt sum omni modo abominado, abominibus se est iniatiuar, per ader omni nodibiles e.g. roto s. Let the flesh of four-legged animals be abstained from altogether by everyone, except for the very weak and sick. This is the core historical rule that shaped centuries of monastic and, to some extent, wider Christian eating habits. The prohibition was absolute and unequivocal. No beef, no pork, no lamb, no venison. But why Brother Michael explains the theological reasoning. The consumption of red meat, the flesh of quadrupeds, was associated with worldly indulgence, with the hunt, with feasts and carnal pleasures. It was considered heating to the blood, thought to inflame the passions and distract the mind from God. To renounce red meat was a powerful, daily act of renouncing the temptations of the secular world you left behind. It was a way to cool the body and, by extension, the soul, making it more receptive to prayer and contemplation. As he speaks, you think of the pork from your last tavern meal, the rich, fatty taste, the feeling of pure, satisfying indulgence. You get it. Giving that up isn't just a dietary choice, it's a profound statement of intent. It's a way of making your body a testament to your vows. But then Brother Michael adds a layer of fascinating practical detail that goes beyond simple theology. This is a lesser known but equally important aspect of the meat ban. For a large, self-sufficient community like a monastery, raising livestock for meat was incredibly inefficient. A cow or a pig consumes a vast amount of grain and fodder over its lifetime, grain and fodder that could be used to feed people directly. A field of barley used to make bread and pottage for the monks could feed far more mouths than if that same barley were used to fatten a cow. So, the ban on eating quadrupeds was also a brilliant piece of resource management. It was economically and agriculturally savvy. The monastery's most valuable resource was its land, and the meat ban ensured that the land was used in the most efficient way possible to sustain the community. You sit back, absorbing this. The rule is both deeply spiritual and intensely practical. It's a perfect marriage of theological principle and agricultural economics, God and good sense working hand in hand. But, as with so many things in this life, the application of the rule lead to some very creative interpretations. This is where the historical debate begins. The Rule of Street. Benedict is crystal clear: four-legged animals are forbidden. So what about animals with 2 legs or no legs? Did Street Benedict's silence on these creatures mean they were permitted? This is the loophole. The great, gaping, feathery loophole that generations of monks would, quite literally, flock to. This is a point of ongoing discussion for academics. Did the early Benedictines intend for this distinction to be exploited, or was it an unforeseen consequence of precise wording? Some scholars argue that the focus was specifically on red meat from livestock because of its cultural association with wealth and aristocracy. Banning it was a clear social statement. Others believe the distinction was more physiological, based on the humoral theory of medicine, which classified foods by their properties: hot, Cold, wet, dry. Red meat was hottened, wet, dry. Red meat was hottened wet, while poultry and fish were considered cooler and less inflammatory to the passions. The exact why behind the two-leg for leg split remains a subject of interpretation, a classic case of trying to read the minds of people who lived 1500 years ago. Brother Michael seems to read your thoughts. He gives a small, knowing smile. The Lord provides in many ways, my son, he whispers, a twinkle in his eye. Not all his creatures walk on 4 feet. You leave the scriptorium with your head spinning. You came in with a simple question about your boring dinner and came out with a complex lesson in theology, economics, and creative rule bending. The ban on red meat is no longer just a frustrating deprivation. You now see it as a cornerstone of your new identity, a choice laden with meaning. But you also have a new sense of curiosity. You've been so focused on what you can't eat that you haven't paid much attention to what you can shin, to what you can shin, to what you can't shin. Your mind starts to wander. If 4 legs are out, what about fins? The bland landscape of your diet suddenly seems to have a few unexplored paths. The conversation with Brother Michael has rewired your brain. You now walk through the monastery with a new kind of awareness, a sort of culinary alertness. You're no longer just noticing what's absent from your plate, you're actively searching for what might be permitted. The rule was clear: no four-legged animals. This has become a strange mantra in your head. As you go about your duties, you find yourself subconsciously counting legs. Sheep in the distant pasture for legs forbidden. The monastery cat, rubbing against your leg for legs, also forbidden, though the thought had, thankfully, never crossed your mind. Then, one day you see it. Behind the main kitchen building is a large, enclosed yard you've never paid much attention to. And inside it are chickens, dozens of them scratching in the dirt, clucking and pecking, blissfully unaware of their bipedal privilege. It's a light bulb moment. 2 legs. Chickens walk on 2 legs. They are, therefore, technically not on the forbidden list. Your heart does a little flutter of excitement. Could it be after weeks of pottage and bread? The thought of roast chicken is so powerful, it's almost dizzying. You start to fantasize about it, the crispy skin, the tender meat. You've found the loophole. That evening, in the refectory, you watch the serving novices with an eagle eye. And then it happens. Interspersed with the usual bowls of pottage, a few platters are brought out. On them are not whole roasted chickens, as you had dreamed, but small portions of what is unmistakably boiled poultry, floating in a thin, parsley-flecked broth. It's not a feast. It's not an indulgence. A small piece is ladled into your bowl, alongside your pottage. It's a modest portion, but it feels like a treasure. You take a bite. The flavor is subtle, almost bland from being boiled, the ghost of the roasted chicken of your memory. But it's undeniably the flesh of an animal. The texture alone is a revelation after weeks of soft, mushy food. It's a small, sanctioned luxury, a direct result of the great two-legged exception. This practice is a well-known historical fact. Many monastic communities interpreted the rule of street. Benedict's silence on poultry as permission to eat it. It became a staple protein source, a way to supplement the diet without technically breaking the most stringent rule. But the creative interpretation didn't stop with the humble chicken. A few weeks later, you discover another, even more obscure loophole. The monastery you're in is situated near a marshland, and on certain days, you see monks returning with nets. You assume they are fishing. But then at the next meal, a different kind of meat appears. It's darker than chicken, with a richer, slightly gamey flavor. It's duck, or perhaps steel. This is where the monastic diet gets truly quirky. A strange and wonderful piece of trivia is how certain aquatic birds were classified. In a stunning feat of theological and biological gymnastics, some monastic thinkers, particularly in the Middle Ages, argued that since these birds spent most of their lives in the water, they could be classified as fish. Yes, you heard that right. Creatures with feathers and beaks were sometimes put in the same nutritional unspiritual category as a carp. As far as it can be pieced together, was that they were of the water, and therefore more akin to the cold nature of fish than the hot nature of land animals. This classification was particularly useful for a creature called the barnacle goose. For centuries, a popular folk belief held that these geese did not hatch from eggs, but instead grew on trees from barnacles overhanging the water, a theory born from the fact that no one had ever seen their nests as they breed in the high Arctic. Because they were not born of the flesh, it was argued that they weren't really meat at all. Eating a barnacle goose, therefore, was not a sin. This belief became so widespread that in 1215, at the Fourth Lateran Council, Pope Innocent I had to step in and officially declare that barnacle geese were, in fact, birds and could not be eaten during Lent. The fact that a pope had to make a formal ruling on the classification of a goose tells you everything you need to know about the human desire to find a loophole. The debate among historians on this point is riotous. Was this a genuine theological belief based on flawed science, or was it a deliberate, cynical fudge? Were these learned monks truly convinced that a duck was a type of fish, or did they just really want to eat duck? The answer is likely a bit of both. The medieval mind was capable of holding complex, and to us contradictory beliefs. They could be deeply pious while also being pragmatic about their diet. The aquatic bird loophole was a perfect example of this. It allowed them to add variety and much-needed protein to their diet while maintaining the letter, if not the spirit, of the law. You finished your portion of the mysterious water bird. It was a welcome change, a brief spark of flavor in a sea of blandness. As you leave the refectory, you look at the world differently. The rules are stone, but interpretation is water. The monks here have learned to be expert navigators, finding channels and streams in the bedrock of the rule. You now know that the key to survival here isn't just about obedience. It's about understanding the rules so well that you can appreciate the genius of the exceptions. The discovery of the two-legged and aquatic loopholes has given you a sliver of hope. But poultry, whether from the land or the water, is a rare treat. It appears on the tables perhaps once a week, maybe less. For the most part, your diet remains stubbornly vegetarian. However, another source of animal protein is far more common, woven into the very fabric of the monastic week: fish. On Fridays, the menu changes. Friday, as a day of penance to commemorate the crucifixion, was a day of meat abstinence for all Christians in the Middle Ages, not just monks. But since you're abstaining from red meat every day anyway, Friday in the monastery is distinguished by the guaranteed appearance of fish. It's a major, well-documented pillar of the medieval diet, both inside and outside the cloister walls. Your work assignment for the week is with the fish keeper, an old, quiet monk named Brother Simon, whose hands seem permanently damp. He leads you out past the vegetable gardens, past the chicken coop, to a part of the monastery grounds you haven't explored. There, shimmering in the morning light, are 3 large, perfectly rectangular ponds. These are the monastery's fish ponds, or stews. This is your first proper look at the monastery's aquaculture system. It's a marvel of medieval engineering and self-sufficiency. Rather than relying on the unpredictable catch from a nearby river, many monasteries, especially the wealthier ones, built their own sophisticated fish farms. Brother Simon explains the system. The ponds are interconnected by a series of small, controllable sluice gates. The highest pond is for breeding the fish. The middle pond is for raising the young fry. Largest pond is the stocking pond, where the mature fish are kept ready for harvesting. It's a conveyor belt of fish production. Your job is simple, but wet. You wade into the shallows of the middle pond with a large net, helping to transfer the adolescent fish this year's crop into the main stocking pond. The water is cold, and the mud sucks at your boots. The fish are surprisingly strong and slippery. It's hard, messy work, but it's fascinating. You are witnessing the monastery's food chain in action. The primary fish being farmed here is carp, a hardy and fast-growing species. But Brother Simon tells you they also have tench bream and, in a special, deeper section of the pond, a few prized pike for the abbot's stable. The most sought-after fish, however, was the eel. Eels were a medieval delicacy, and monasteries with rivers running through their land would have sophisticated eel traps to catch them. A strange and little-known fact about monastic fish consumption is their fondness for a particularly bizarre-looking fish, the beaver. Wait, a beaver, yes, a beaver. Much like the barnacle goose, the beaver's tail, being scaly and flat, and because the animal spent so much time in the water, led medieval scholars to classify it as a type of fish. Its tail, in particular, was considered permissible to eat on fast days. This ruling came from the Faculty of Theology in Paris in the 13th century, making it academically, if not biologically, sound. The image of a pious monk tucking into a roasted beaver tail for his Friday penance is a testament to the creative lengths people would go to for dietary variety. Back in the refectory that Friday, the fruits of your labor appear on the table. A large platter of poached carp is served. Each monk receives a small, bony section. It's served simply, probably boiled in the same pot as the pottage, with a sprinkle of herbs. You take your first bite. The flesh is soft, but full of tiny, treacherous bones that you have to carefully pick out. The flavor is muddy, earthy, a direct taste of the pond you were standing in this morning. Fresh taste of a sea fish, it's the taste of damp earth and still water. This leads to a point of contention among historians. What did this fish actually taste like? We know they ate a lot of it. But was it any good food? Archaeologists who have studied the remains of these fish ponds suggest that the water could be stagnant and the ponds overcrowded, leading to fish that were, to put it politely, an acquired taste. Without refrigeration, the fish had to be cooked and eaten almost immediately after being caught. The common methods of preparation, salting, smoking, or pickling, were used for preservation, but these techniques would have overpowered any delicate flavors. Some argue that the liberal use of the few available herbs, like parsley and sage, and sauces made from vinegar or verjuice or juice from unripe grapes, was less about culinary artistry and more about masking the muddy, off flavors of the fish itself. Was the Friday fish a welcome treat, or a bony, muddy chore to be endured? The answer probably depended heavily on the skill of the cook and the quality of the pond. You carefully pick the last piece of flesh from the carp's skeleton. It wasn't delicious, but it was different. It was a break in the routine, and it came with the satisfaction of knowing where it came from. You helped provide this meal. As you look at the fish bones left on your plate, you feel a connection to the cycle of life in this self-contained world. The pond, the net, the kitchen, the table. It's a simple, predictable, and perfectly closed loop. You are a part of it. After the brief excitement of poultry and fish, the daily reality of your diet reasserts itself. The foundation of your meals, besides the bread, comes from the earth. Not the glorious, varied bounty of a modern farmer's market, but the humble, hearty output of the monastery's own vegetable garden. Your new work assignment is here, under the watchful eye of Brother Thomas, the monastery's horticulturist. The garden, or hortus, is a large, rectangular plot of land, meticulously organized into raised beds. It's a scene of orderly, disciplined nature. No sprawling pumpkin patches or chaotic tomato vines here. Everything is in neat rows. Everything is in neat rows. Everything is in neat rows. A reflection of the monastic obsession with order. This garden is the primary source for the pottage, the place where the eternal gets its daily infusion of solid. Your first task is weeding. You spend hours on your knees, your fingers deep in the cool, dark soil, pulling out invasive plants. As you work, you get a good, long look at what's actually growing here. The selection is, to be blunt, a bit depressing. The mainstays of the monastic garden were hardy, workhorse vegetables. You see rows of onions, leeks, and garlic, the allium that form the flavor base of medieval cooking. There are beds of turnips, parsnips, and carrots, though the carrots are likely pale, yellowish-white things, not the bright orange varieties we know today. And, of course, there is cabbage. So much cabbage. This is the historical reality of the medieval European diet. The variety was limited to what could survive the climate and store well through the winter. You won't find potatoes, tomatoes, bell peppers, or corn here. Those are all from the New World and won't arrive in Europe for centuries. Your vegetable world is one of roots, leaves, and legumes. You see vast patches of fava beans and peas, which were often grown to be dried and used in the pottage year-round. Brother Thomas shows you the herb garden, a smaller, more fragrant section. Here you find parsley, sage, mint, rosemary, and thyme. These were the essential medicinal and culinary herbs. They were used not just for flavor, but for their perceived health benefits, according to the principles of humoral medicine. Rosemary was thought to be good for the memory, while mint was used to aid digestion. As you're clearing a patch of weeds, you uncover a plant with fuzzy leaves and a beautiful, star-shaped blue flower. You've never seen it before. Brother Thomas comes over and smiles. "Ah, borage," he says, "the herb of courage. This is one of those charming, lesser-known details of monastic gardens. Borage was a common herb, and its flowers and leaves were often eaten. Pliny the Elder wrote that borage maketh a man merry and joyful, and it was traditionally used to brew a tea given to monks who were feeling melancholic or spiritually downcast. The beautiful blue flowers were sometimes floated in the cups of wine given to distinguished guests as a sign of respect. It's a small touch of poetry in this very practical garden. You spend the rest of a long, back-breaking day harvesting turnips. You pull them from the ground, twist off their green tops, and load them into a wheelbarrow. Later, in the kitchen, you see your harvest. The turnips are unceremoniously chopped and dumped into the great cauldron. There is no delicate preparation, no roasting to bring out their sweetness. They are simply boiled into submission, destined to become soft, watery lumps in the pottage. This treatment of vegetables leads to a debate among culinary historians and scientists. The traditional monastic method of cooking was prolonged boiling. Vegetables were cooked for hours, until they were completely soft and broken down. From a modern nutritional standpoint, this is a disaster. It destroys many of the vitamins, particularly vitamin C. This has led some historians to argue that monks may have suffered from low-level vitamin deficiencies, especially in winter when fresh greens were scarce. They point to skeletal remains from monastic cemeteries that sometimes show signs of conditions like scurvy. However, other scholars argue that this view is too simplistic. They contend that while boiling does destroy some nutrients, it also makes others more bioavailable. The long cooking process would have broken down tough cellulose, making the vegetables easier to digest and allowing the body to absorb more of their caloric and mineral content. Furthermore, they argue that the sheer quantity of vegetables consumed, even overcooked ones, combined with the nutrient-dense whole grain bread and vitamin-rich ale, would have provided a diet that was, if not optimal by our standards, certainly sufficient to prevent widespread, acute malnutrition or not. Question is complex, with the answer likely being nutritious enough to survive and work hard, but probably not delicious. At dinner, you spoon the familiar pottage into your mouth. You can taste the turnip. It's not a pleasant sharp, earthy flavor. It's a faint, watery ghost of a turnip, a mere suggestion of the vegetable you pulled from the ground this morning. You look at your hands, your fingernails still caked with the dark, rich soil of the garden. There's a profound disconnect between the vibrant, living plant and the pale, lifeless mush in your bowl. You are beginning to understand that in the monastery, food is not meant to be celebrated for what it is. It is meant to be transformed, subdued, its worldly essence boiled away until only its function as humble sustenance remains. You've settled into the rhythms of monastic life. You understand the food, the work, the silence. But there's one aspect of the daily routine you've accepted without much thought: the drink. At every main meal, alongside your bread and pottage, you are given a beaker of ale. You've heard tales of monks being master brewers, of abbeys famous for their strong, flavorful ales. So you think, at least the drink is a small luxury, right? Wrong. You take a sip of the ale in your cup. It's thin, watery, and has a slightly sour, bready taste. There's almost no discernible alcohol kick to it. It's less like the hearty ale from the tavern of your memory and more like bread-flavored water. This, you learn, is cerevisiae, more commonly known as small beer or small ale, and it is your constant companion. The historical image of monks brewing exceptional, high-alcohol beer is true, but it's a partial truth. Those strong, rich ales, the ones we might think of as Trappist ales today, were generally not for the monks themselves. They were brewed for important guests, for generating income by selling to the public, or for consumption on major feast days. The daily drink of the average monk was a far more humble affair. One afternoon, your work rotation takes you to the brewhouse. It's a warm, humid building filled with the sweet, malty smell of boiling wort. Here, Brother Anselm, the brewer, presides over several large wooden tuns. He explains the process, and in doing so, reveals the secret of your sad watery ale. The process starts like any other beer. They take malted barley, steep it in hot water to release the sugars, and create a sweet liquid called wort. This first batch of wort, rich in sugars, is what they use to make the good stuff, the strong ale. Or prima melior, this is the beer for the abbot and his guests. But they don't discard the grains after this first infusion. Oh, no, that would be wasteful. Instead, they run more water through the already used grains. The second running, the secunda extracts the remaining residual sugars. The resulting wort is much weaker, much less sugary. This is the wort that is fermented to become your daily small beer. Sometimes, for an even weaker brew given to servants or used for cooking, they'd even do a third running. It was a brilliant system of tiered production, ensuring that every last bit of potential was squeezed from the precious malted grain. Your daily ale is literally the leftover brew. A funny and slightly gross bit of trivia about medieval brewing is the role of something called a gearewort. Before the widespread use of hops as a preservative and flavoring agent, which became common in the later Middle Ages, beers were often unflavored and preserved with a proprietary mixture of herbs and spices called a gearewort. The exact recipe was often a closely guarded secret, but it could include things like bog myrtle, yarrow, and wild rosemary. This is why any early medieval ales would have had a strange, herbal, sometimes even medicinal taste, very different from the bitter, hoppy beers we know today. Brother Anselm lets you taste a spoonful of the first run wort. It's incredibly sweet, like liquid candy. Then he gives you a taste of the second run wort. It's thin, pale, and only faintly sweet. The difference is staggering. This second-rate liquid is then fermented, but not for long. The low sugar content means it ferments into a beer with a very low alcohol content, probably between 1% and 2.5% ABV. But why drink it at all? Why not just drink water? Brother Anselm explains that the local water source, while fine for washing, whilst always safe to drink, the process of boiling the wort killed any pathogens, making the resulting small beer a much safer option than plain water. It was hydration you could trust. Furthermore, it was nutritious. The beer retained vitamins and minerals from the grain, and the residual yeast was a good source of B vitamins. It was often called liquid bread, and for good reason. It was a source of calories and nutrients, a foodstuff in its own right. Its purpose wasn't intoxication or pleasure, it was safe, reliable hydration and nutrition. The debate among historians revolves around St. Benedict's original intention for drink. In his rule, he permits a hemina, about half-a-liter of vinum wine per day, but famously says it would be better if monks drank nothing at all. He was writing in 6th century Italy, where wine was the common drink. But what happened when the Benedictine order spread to the beer-drinking regions of Northern Europe, like Germany, England, and the Low Countries? This is where the interpretation and adaptation come in. Northern monasteries substituted ale for wine, but the quantity and quality were endlessly debated. Did a himina of strong Italian wine equate to a himina of weak English ale? How did they translate the spirit of moderation from a wine culture to a beer culture? Some scholars argue that the switch to small beer was a perfect solution, embodying the principle of sustenance without indulgence. Others suggest that many monasteries, particularly the wealthier ones, took a more liberal interpretation, brewing and consuming much stronger ales than the rules might imply. The archaeological evidence of huge brew houses and massive amounts of grain dedicated to brewing suggests that, in some places at least, the liquid bread was a little more interesting than the stuff in your cup. You think Brother Anselm and leave the brewhouse, your head full of wort runnings. At dinner, you look at the pale, thin ale in your beaker with a new understanding. It's not a failed attempt at a good beer. It's a successful attempt at a safe, nutritious, and deeply humble beverage. It is the perfect drink for a monk. It quenches thirst, provides energy, keeps you healthy, and offers absolutely zero temptation to worldly pleasure. It is, in its own watery way, a masterpiece of monastic discipline. You're starting to feel like you've got the hang of this. You know the food, you know the unspoken rules. You've mastered the art of eating silently while trying to decipher at unreading about the minor prophets. You feel a sense of competence, and then you sit down for a meal and realize you've been doing something wrong all along, something so basic you never even thought about it. Your table manners. The monk sitting opposite you, a stern, older man named Brother Paul, has been subtly observing you. After the meal, he pulls you aside in the cloister. He doesn't speak harshly, but his words are direct. He informs you that your use of your knife has been improper. You've been using it to spear pieces of boiled turnip from your bowl and lift them to your mouth. This, apparently, is a grave error. He explains the proper etiquette of the monastic refectory. You are provided with 2 utensils, a spoon for the pottage and other liquid dishes, and a knife. The knife, personal item that you are expected to keep sharp and clean, has a very specific purpose. It is for cutting your bread, for slicing any larger pieces of vegetable or fish that might appear in your bowl, and for portioning food on your trencher, a thick slab of stale bread that often served as a plate and only cutting. Using the point to spear food indeed with it was considered crude, animalistic, and dangerously close to turning a tool into a weapon at the dinner table. It implied a gluttonous haste that was contrary to the spirit of a meditative meal. This focus on the proper use of the knife is a well-documented aspect of medieval table manners, both inside and outside the monastery. But there's another utensil conspicuous by its absence, the fork. You look around the refectory that evening and confirm it. Spoons and knives, yes. Forks, no. You eat solid food either with a spoon or by picking it up with your fingers after cutting it into a manageable size. The fork did exist at this time, but it was viewed with deep suspicion in much of Europe, especially in a religious context. It was an Italian invention, gaining some popularity in the Byzantine Empire. But to the monks of Northern Europe, it was a bizarre and unnecessary affectation. This is a fascinating historical tidbit. The fork was seen as scandalously decadent, an overly fussy tool for a job that God had already given you fingers for. More than that, it carried a whiff of the profane. The fork's miniature to pronged shape was seen by some hardline clerics as a mimicry of the devil's pitchfork. To use one was seen as a sign of vanity, effeminous, and even demonic influence. Street. Peter Damian, an 11th century cardinal, famously condemned a Byzantine princess who brought golden forks to her new home in Venice, declaring her use of them an insult to God. He considered her subsequent death from the plague to be divine punishment for her vanity. While this was an extreme view, it highlights the cultural resistance to this simple, and to us essential, piece of cutlery. So here you are, in a world where using a fork is a sign of moral corruption. You are expected to eat with your hands, but in a very prescribed way. You must use only your right hand for eating. You must keep your hands clean, wiping them on a communal napkin, not on your robe. It's a delicate, mannered way of eating that feels far more complicated than just using a fork. The historical debate around this is less about facts and more about the why. Why did the fork eventually catch on? Despite such strong initial resistance, the transition was incredibly slow, taking centuries. Some historians argue that it was driven by changing notions of hygiene, especially after the Black Death. People became more wary of sharing bowls and eating with their hands. Others suggest it was a top-down fashion trend, starting with the Italian aristocracy and slowly spreading as a marker of sophistication and refinement. Still others point to practical reasons, like the increasing popularity of pasta, a food that is notoriously difficult to eat with a spoon and fingers. The fork's journey from a tool of the devil to a staple of the dinner table is a slow, complex story of changing culture, fashion, and technology. You practice the next day. You carefully cut a piece of boiled cabbage with the side of your knife. You then delicately pick it up with your thumb and two fingers and bring it to your mouth, trying to look as pious and ungluttonous as possible. It feels awkward and inefficient. Your mind flashes back to that last tavern meal, where you casually speared a piece of pork with your knife tip without a second thought. You are learning that every single action in this place, down to the way you hold your knife, is freighted with meaning. There is no such thing as a neutral gesture. Everything is either a step towards God or a step back towards the messy, chaotic, forcading world of base simples. Your table manners are not about etiquette, they are another form of prayer, another way to discipline the body and, hopefully, the soul. And you now know the number one rule of monastic dining: don't bring a fork to a pottage fight. Just when you think you've adapted to the baseline level of deprivation, the rules change. The seasons are turning, the air grows colder, and a new period in the liturgical calendar begins Advent, the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. And with Advent comes a new, more intense period of fasting. You thought the diet was restrictive before you had no idea. The abbot announces the beginning of the Advent fast in the chapter house. The already simple diet is to be pared back even further. The small luxuries you've come to appreciate, the occasional serving of poultry or fish, the dollop of honey in your morning porridge, are gone. The quantity of your food is also reduced. The pound of bread feels slightly lighter. The ladle of pottage in your bowl seems shallower. This is a core part of the monastic experience, a historical reality that governed their lives. The entire year was punctuated by periods of feasting and fasting. The most famous and grueling of these was, of course, Lent, the 40 days before Easter. But Advent was a significant fasting period as well, a time of spiritual preparation and penance. Fasting wasn't about weight loss, it was about spiritual purification. The hunger in your belly was meant to sharpen the hunger in your soul for God. By denying the body, you were meant to nourish the spirit. Your days become a slow, draining march. The cold seeps into the stone walls of the monastery, and the reduced calories make you feel it more acutely. You move slower, your thoughts feel sluggish. The morning prayers in the unheated chapel are an exercise in endurance. Your breath plumbing in the frigid air. The gnawing emptiness in your stomach is a constant companion. One evening, you are so hungry that you commit a small, desperate crime. After the kitchen is closed for the night, you sneak back in. The great cauldron of pottage is still warm, the banked fire glowing beneath it. Your heart hammering in your chest, you lift the heavy lid, grab a spoon, and take two quick, guilty mouthfuls of the lukewarm stew. It's the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. You're halfway to a third spoonful when you hear a floorboard creak behind you. It's one of the older monks, holding a single candle. He doesn't look angry, just weary and disappointed. You've been caught. This is where you learn about Lenten bread, or more accurately, punishment bread. It's a strange, little-known detail of monastic discipline. For minor infractions, especially during a fast, a common penance was to be put on a diet of just bread and water. But sometimes a special penance bread was baked. It was made with the poorest quality flour, sometimes mixed with bran and dashes, and was designed to be as unpleasant to eat as possible. It was a physical manifestation of your wrongdoing. Your penance for your midnight snack is 3 days of this miserable bread. It's heavy, bitter, and tastes of your own failure. The experience is humbling, but it also makes you keenly aware of the psychological toll of this existence. How did they cope? Did everyone stick to the rules? The historical debate here is fierce. The official records, the chronicles, the rules, the letters from abbots all present an image of pious observance. But human nature is a powerful force. Some historians, often called the revisionists, argue that we should be skeptical of the official accounts. They suggest that breaking the fast was likely a common, if hidden, reality. They point to account books from some monasteries that show unusual purchases of spices or finer foods during Lent, possibly for the abbot's stable or to be consumed in secret. They imagine monks like you sneaking food from the kitchens or finding ways to supplement their diet through medicinal allowances from the infirmary. They argue that the very severity of the rules almost guaranteed they would be broken. On the other hand, more traditional historians argue that we should not underestimate the power of faith. They contend that for the truly devout, the physical hardship of the fast was a welcome spiritual challenge, a way to grow closer to God. They believe that the vast majority of monks would have endured the hunger with a sense of purpose and commitment that is difficult for our modern, secular minds to fully grasp. They see the fast not as a hunger game of survival, but as a collective act of profound spiritual devotion. The truth, as is often the case, is probably somewhere in the middle, a messy mix of sincere piety and human frailty. On the 4th day, your penance is over. You are allowed to have pottage again. You sit in the refectory, and the server ladles the familiar grace into your bowl. After 3 days of ashes and water, it looks like the most magnificent feast you have ever seen. You take a spoonful, and the simple, bland warmth of it fills you with a sense of overwhelming gratitude. The fast has worked its strange magic on you. It hasn't necessarily brought you closer to God, but it has completely recalibrated your relationship with food. You've learned that hunger is a lens. It can make a man a criminal for 2 spoonfuls of stew, and it can make that same to taste like a banquet. It is a harsh and powerful teacher. The harshness of the Advent fast takes its toll. The gnawing hunger, the relentless cold, and the sheer physical exhaustion of the prayer schedule finally catch up with you. You wake up one morning with a hacking cough, a feverish sweat on your brow, and a feeling of profound weakness. You can barely stand. A fellow novice notices your condition and alerts the infirmarian, the monk in charge of the monastery's medical care. You are officially declared double-e.g. weak and sick. And with that diagnosis, you are moved to a part of the monastery you've only ever heard about in whispers: the infirmary. The infirmary is a separate building connected to the main cloister by a covered walkway. It's like a miniature monastery within the monastery within the monastery, with its own small chapel, a garden for medicinal herbs, and a kitchen. The moment you enter, you notice 2 things. First, it is warm. A proper fire is crackling in a hearth, a luxury you haven't felt in months. Second, there is a different smell of pottage or incense. It's the smell of roasting meat. You are given a bed in a small, quiet room. The infirmarian, a kindly, gentle monk named Brother Leo, checks on you. He gives you a warm herbal infusion to drink and tells you to rest. For lunch, a novice brings you a tray. And on it, you see something that makes your feverish eyes go wide. There is a small cup of strong, dark wine, not the watery small beer. And next to it, a small portion of roasted chicken and, even more shockingly, a few slices of what looks like mutton, swimming in a rich gravy. This is the great, sanctioned exception to the entire monastic dietary system. The rule of Street. Benedict, so uncompromising in its ban on the flesh of quadrupeds, makes a single, explicit exception: P.R.A. eater omni no D, rotos, except for the very weak and sick. This is a foundational piece of historical knowledge about monastic life. The infirmary was the one place where the rules were bent for the sake of healing. You take a hesitant bite of the mutton. The rich, savory flavor explodes in your mouth. It's a shock to your system after so long without it. The strong wine warms you from the inside out. This isn't just food, it's medicine. Based on the prevailing humoral theory, red meat and strong wine were considered hot and moist foods, believed to restore a sick person's depleted vital humors and give them strength. Your bland, cool diet of vegetables and water was fine for a healthy, spiritually focused monk, but for a sick man, it was considered insufficient, even dangerous. A lesser-known and rather amusing aspect of the infirmary diet is the concept of the convalescence portion. Once a monk was deemed to be recovering, but not yet fully healed, he would enter a sort of dietary halfway house. He might be allowed to continue eating meat, but only on certain days. Or he might be allowed to eat in the infirmary refectory, where the rules were more relaxed, even if he was eating the standard pottage. This created a bit of a gray area. How sick did you have to be to qualify, and how long could you stretch out your convalescence? This leads directly to one of the most cynical and debated topics among historians of monasticism. Was the infirmary system abused? The official purpose of the meat privilege was purely therapeutic. But the temptation it presented was enormous. Imagine spending 20 years eating nothing but beans, unboiled cabbage. The lure of a legitimate, rule-sanctioned roast dinner would have been immense. Some historians argue that faking it was a common problem. They point to monastic records that complain about monks feigning illness to get into the infirmary, or abbots who had to issue stern warnings against infirmary vagrancy. There are accounts of monks who seemed to suffer from a remarkable number of convenient, minor illnesses that required a short stay and a few meaty meals. In some larger, wealthier abbeys, a significant percentage of the monks might be residing in the infirmary at any given time, leading to suspicions that it had become a sort of private club for those seeking comfort and better food. There's even a term for it, e.g. road a tio ficte or faked sickness. On the other side of the debate, historians argue that this cynical view underestimates the piety and integrity of the monks, as well as the genuine risks of illness in the medieval period. Life was fragile. A simple cough could turn into pneumonia. They contend that most monks would have taken illness very seriously and would have seen the infirmary, but as a place of genuine healing and vulnerability. They argue that the abuses were likely exaggerated by grumpy abbots and that for the most part, the system worked as intended, a compassionate exception to a harsh rule. The truth is likely that human nature ran its full course within monastery walls. Some were pious, some were frail, and some were just very clever opportunists. You spend 3 days in the warmth and comfort of the infirmary. The good food and dress work their magic. Your fever breaks, your cough subsides. Brother Leo declares you well enough to return to the main dormitory. You are genuinely grateful for the care you've received. But as you walk back across the covered walkway, a part of you is sad to leave. You're returning to the cold, to the pottage, to the discipline. You have tasted the exception, and it was delicious. You understand the true power of being sick. It is the only legitimate holiday you get. Now that you're back on your feet, your new work rotation takes you to the very heart of the monastery's food world, the kitchen. If the refectory is the soul of the monastery's diet, the kitchen is its roaring, chaotic, and perpetually sweaty engine room. And you quickly realize that the monks who work here are a special breed. The monastic kitchen is a cavern of stone and smoke. The air is thick with the competing smells of boiling vegetables, baking bread from the adjacent bakehouse, and the ever-present, slightly sour aroma of the pottage cauldron. It's loud, hot, and surprisingly crowded. You're not working with the main kitchener, a senior monk who acts as a supervisor, but with the lower-ranking monks and lay brothers tasked with the endless, back-breaking labor of food preparation. These are the unsung heroes of the monastery. Your first job is to scrub the pots, not the great cauldron. which is never touched, but the dozens of smaller pans and bowls used for side dishes or for the infirmary as special meals. The water is greasy, the pots are heavy, and there's no modern scouring pad, just and undrough cloths. It's grueling work. While you scrub, you observe the kitchen staff. Their work is a non-stop cycle of chopping, stirring, hauling, and cleaning. They are the first to rise, long before the matins bell, to get the fires going and start the slow cooking process for the day's meals. They are the last to finish cleaning up long after the final prayer of Compline has been sung. This is a crucial historical point. The Benedictine ideal was that all monks should take their turn in the kitchen. Chapter 35 of the rule states, "Let the brethren serve one another, and let no one be excused from the kitchen service unless he be prevented by sickness or by preoccupation with some matter of great utility." The idea was to foster humility and a spirit of service. No one, not even a monk from a noble family, was supposed to be above washing the dishes. However, as you look around, you notice something interesting. While some of the workers are indeed choir monks like yourself, taking their weekly turn, the really hard, dirty work is being done by men in slightly different, rougher robes. These are the lay brothers, or converts. They were men who took monastic vows, but were not ordained priests and whose duties were primarily focused on manual labor rather than prayer and study. They were the monastery's permanent workforce, the farmers, blacksmiths, and, most relevantly, the kitchen hands. This leads to a little-known and rather class-based detail of monastic life. In many larger monasteries, the everyone takes a turn rule was, in practice, often bypassed. The choir monks, the educated men who performed the full divine office, would have their kitchen duties performed for them by these lay brothers. He created a two-tiered system. While the rule preached equality, the reality was often a division of labor that mirrored the secular world split between aristocrats and laborers. The choir monks fed the soul, and the lay brothers fed the choir monks. You graduate from pot scrubbing to vegetable chopping. You are handed a large knife and a mountain of leeks. You join a line of other monks, all rhythmically chopping. The sound of dull, constant percussion in the noisy kitchen. It's monotonous work, and your back aches. You see the sheer scale of the operation. Cooking for 100 men is a feat of logistics. Everything is done in bulk. There is no room for delicate, individual preparation. It's all about efficiency and volume. A historical debate rages around the figure of the monastic cook or kitchener. What kind of person was he? The idealized view presents him as a humble servant, piously preparing simple food. Photos paint a different picture. The kitchener was a powerful figure. He controlled the food supply, a source of immense influence within the monastery. He had to be a skilled manager, capable of budgeting, sourcing ingredients, and planning menus for the entire year. Was this position a desirable one? Some historians argue that it was a thankless, difficult job that most monks would have tried to avoid. The kitchen was hot, smelly, and the work was endless. Others contend that for a certain type of personality, it was a position of great power and creative freedom within the rules, of course. The kitchener could bend the rules, deciding when to serve poultry, or ensuring that the best fish from the pond went to the right people. He could be a source of comfort, sneaking an extra piece of bread to a young novice, or a petty tyrant, serving the worst parts of the fish to those he disliked. The personality of the kitchener could define the culinary atmosphere of the entire monastery. Your shift ends. You leave the kitchen, your hands smelling of leeks, your robe stained, and your ears ringing. You feel a new respect for the men who toil there every day. They are the invisible foundation of the monastery's spiritual life. Every chant sung in the chapel, every line of scripture copied in the scriptorium, is powered by the calories they chop, stir, and serve. That evening in the refectory, as you eat your pottage, you taste the leeks you chopped, and you think about the lay brother you saw earlier, his face red from the heat of the fire, stirring the great cauldron with a steady, patient rhythm. He will never sit in the scriptria morbate theology. His work is here in the heat and the noise. He is a silent, nameless hero, and you realize that the monastery, like any great house, runs on the hard work of those whose names are never recorded. Life has settled into a predictable, if bland, routine. You eat your pottage, your occasional fish, all washed down with watery ale. You've become accustomed to the lack of strong flavors. Your palate has been reset to a state of monastic neutrality. Then, one day, something extraordinary happens. A new work assignment takes you not to the gardens or the kitchen, but to the cellarium, the monastery as cellarin storeroom. You encounter the most precious substance in the entire abbey, salt. The cellarer, the monk in charge of all provisions, is a brisk, organized man who seems to have an inventory of the entire monastery in his head. He points you to a corner of the vast, cool, stone-walled cellar. There you see several large, heavy barrels. He tells you to open one and transfer some of its contents into smaller bags for the kitchen. You pry open the lid. Inside is a mound of coarse, grayish-white crystals. Salt. It seems so mundane, but in this world, it is white gold. You run your fingers through it. It feels cool and slightly damp. The cellarer warns you not to spill a single grain. This stuff is more valuable than the grain it will be sprinkled on. This is a fundamental truth of the pre-modern world. Salt was a hugely valuable commodity. It was the primary means of preserving food. Without refrigeration, meat and fish had to be salted to last through the winter. It was also a crucial dietary nutrient. In a world of hard manual labor and sweaty prayer sessions, replacing lost sodium was essential for health. The monastery's supply of salted fish and preserved meats for the infirmary depended entirely on a steady, reliable supply of salt. The cellarer explains that their salt comes from a long way away, transported by cart from coastal salt pans or inland salt mines. The journey is long and expensive, which is why the supply is guarded so jealously. You carefully scoop the salt into the bags, your movements slow and deliberate. You feel like you're handling treasure. This scarcity leads to a strange and little-known fact about its use. Salt was often dispensed with an almost ceremonial reverence. In the refectory, you realize you've never seen a salt shaker on the table. Salt was not something you could just add at will. It was added by the cooks in the kitchen in carefully measured amounts. The only exception was for honored guests, who would have a small, often ornate salt cellar placed before them as a sign of high status. For the common monk, to demand more salt would be a sign of gluttony and a lack of humility. You were to accept the food as it was prepared. As you work, you notice a few other, smaller chests in a locked part of the cellar. You ask the cellarer what's inside. He unlocks one and shows you. Your eyes go wide. The chest is filled with the intoxicating aroma of peppercorns, cloves, and nutmeg, spices. If salt was gold, spices were diamonds. They were astronomically expensive, imported from the far corners of the known world, the Middle East, India, the Spice Islands along treacherous trade routes. Their presence in a monastery storeroom is a sign of immense wealth and prestige. But who were they for? Certainly not for your daily pottage. The cellarer explains that these are used only for the most important feast days, for flavoring the wine given to a visiting bishop, or in medicinal preparations in the infirmary. Spices, like red meat, were believed to have powerful humoral properties. Pepper was hot and dry, good for counteracting cold and moist illnesses. Their use was primarily medical and ceremonial, not culinary. This brings us to a major historical debate, the spice fallacy. For a long time, the popular theory was that medieval cooks, including those in monasteries, used heavy-handed amounts of spice to cover up the taste of spoiled or rotting meat. It's a compelling image, a cook desperately trying to mask the flavor of rancid pork with a mountain of cloves. However, most modern food historians now argue that this is a myth. They contend that anyone who could afford spices could most certainly afford fresh meat. Spices were a status symbol To douse a piece of fine meat in expensive spices was not to hide its flaws, but to flaunt your wealth. It was like putting gold leaf on a cake. You weren't trying to make it taste better, you were showing people you could afford to put gold on your food. So when a monastery used spices, it was a deliberate act of conspicuous consumption, reserved for occasions when they needed to project power and influence. The abbot's feast for a visiting nobleman wasn't just a meal, it was a political statement, and the nutmeg in the sauce was the equivalent of a press release. You finish bagging the salt in the cell, or locks the spice just with a firm, final click. The brief, fragrant glimpse into a world of flavor is over. You return to the everyday world of bland sufficiency. That the memory of that scent, the sharp bite of pepper, the warm sweetness of clove lingers in your mind. At dinner, you take a mouthful of your pottage. It tastes different now. You are acutely aware of what it's missing. Before, it was just bland. Now, its blandness feels like a deliberate choice, a statement of principle. The absence of salt and spice is as meaningful as their presence would be. It's a taste of humility, a flavor of poverty. You understand that in the monastery, you are not just eating food, you are eating theology. And tonight, the monotony of the official diet is starting to wear on you. Your body has adapted, but your mind still rebels. It craves novelty, a flash of flavor, anything to break the endless cycle of pottage and bread. You've noticed some of the other younger monks occasionally returning from their work in the fields or woods, with their hands tucked into their sleeves, a look of quiet satisfaction on their faces. You're beginning to suspect there's an unofficial food economy at play, a world of foraging that exists in the gray areas of the rule. Your work assignment this week is to collect firewood from the monastery's extensive woodlands. You are sent out with a cart and a few other novices. It's a crisp autumn day, and the woods are alive with a different kind of energy than the cloister. Here there are no bells, only the rustle of leaves and the chatter of birds. It feels liberating. As you gather fallen branches, you keep your eyes open. You remember the stories your grandmother used to tell you about the bounty of the forest. And sure enough, you start to see it. At the base of an old oak tree, you find a cluster of wild mushrooms. Are they edible? You have no idea. You leave them be. A little further on, you spot a flash of reed in the undergrowth wild strawberries, small but intensely colored. You pop one in your mouth. The burst of sweet, sharp flavor is a revelation. It's more intense than any cultivated fruit you've ever tasted. It feels illicit and wonderful. This is a key part of the medieval peasant and, by extension, monastic experience foraging. The woods and hedgerows were a free larder for those who knew what to look for. This was the historical reality for most people. The diet was supplemented by whatever could be gathered. For a monk, this was a complicated activity. Officially, all property was communal. To pick something for your own private consumption was a form of theft, a violation of your vow of poverty. But a certain amount of unofficial gathering was often tolerated. You continue your search. You find a bush heavy with tart, dark slow as to sour to eat raw, but you've seen the lay brothers collect them to make a bitter liqueur. You pass a patch of wild garlic. Its scent sharp and tempting. You crush even the smell is so strong it makes your eyes water. You imagine stirring that into your pottage. What a transformation it would be. Then you find the real prize, a hazel tree, its branches loaded with ripe nuts. You and the other novices look at each other. No words are exchanged, but there's a shared understanding. You spend 10 minutes quickly and quietly gathering the hazelnuts, stuffing them into the small pouches hidden inside your robes. Your heart is pounding with a mixture of guilt and excitement. This feels like a true transgression. A quirky and little-known aspect of this is the sheer variety of what was foraged. It wasn't just berries and nuts. People ate wild greens, which were collectively known as sal-lets, from which we get the word salad. This included things we'd now consider weeds, like dandelion greens, chickweed, unsorrel. They would also gather acorns, which had to be leached of their bitter tannins by soaking them in water before they could be ground into a flour to supplement the bread. Foraging wasn't just a fun hobby, it was a science of survival, a body of knowledge passed down through generations. You return to the monastery, the weight of the stolen nuts a guilty secret in your robe. The question that historians debate is how monastic authorities viewed this kind of activity. Was it seen as a harmless way for monks to supplement a meager diet, a sort of unofficial safety valve to keep morale up, or was it viewed as a serious breach of discipline that needed to be stamped out? The evidence is mixed. Some monastic customaries, books of local rules and customs, have explicit prohibitions against wandering in the woods or eating outside of the refectory. Abbots wrote letters complaining about monks who were more interested in gathering nuts than in their prayers. This suggests that authorities were concerned about the practice, seeing it as a slippery slope toward individualism and a disregard for the rules. However, other evidence suggests a more lenient attitude. The lack of widespread, severe punishments for such minor infractions in many monastic records could imply a tacit acceptance. A wise abbot might have understood that a handful of hazelnuts could prevent a monk from becoming truly demoralized. He might have turned a blind eye, understanding that a little bit of gray area was necessary to make the black and white rules of the monastery livable. It's the classic conflict between the letter of the law and the spirit of human need. That night, in the quiet of the dormitory, long after the final prayers, you lie in your cot and carefully crack open a hazelnut. You eat it slowly, savoring the rich, oily, earthy flavor. It's a taste of freedom. It's a secret. It's a small act of rebellion against the crushing sameness of your official life. It's a reminder that even in a world walled in by stone and rules, there are still pockets of wildness to be found, if you just know where to look. The taste of that single hazelnut, for aged uneaten in secret, is more satisfying than any sanctioned meal you've had since you arrived. The secret hazelnuts are long gone, but the memory of their taste and the guilt associated with it lingers. Your act of foraging has made you acutely aware of a new dimension of your monastic life, the constant, internal battle against sin. And in the world of food, the chief enemy is gluttony. In the chapter house, the abbot gives a sermon. He doesn't talk about foraging nuts or sneaking extra pottage. He talks about something far more insidious. He talks about the 5 ways a person can commit the sin of gluttony, as defined by Pope Gregory the Great centuries earlier. This isn't just about eating too much. The medieval understanding of this sin was far more sophisticated. You listen, captivated and horrified as he lists them. First, eating too soon, being impatient and eating before the designated mealtime. Your midnight snack in the kitchen flashes in your mind. Second, eating too expensively or the durables, seeking out delicate and fine foods. Your daydreams of roast chicken and spiced wine feel like a confession. Third, eating too much simple overconsumption. Fourth, eating too eagerly, losing your sense of decorum and meditative calm in your haste to eat. You think of how you sometimes wolf down your bread. And fifth, eating too fastidiously, being overly picky, demanding elaborate preparations. This was the foodie sin. This detailed, 5-fold definition of gluttony is a core historical concept in Christian ethics. It transformed the sin from a simple act of overeating into a complex psychological state. Gluttony wasn't just about the food on the plate, it was about the attitude in your heart. It was about desire, impatience, and a lack of gratitude for simple sustenance. You realize that you've probably committed all 5 types of gluttony in your heart, if not in your actions, in the last week alone. The sermon is designed to make you police your own thoughts. The real battle isn't in the kitchen or the refectory, it's inside your own head. The blandness of the food now seems like a deliberate spiritual tool. It's hard to eat too eagerly when your food is a gray, tasteless mush. The diet is a form of preventative medicine for the soul. It's designed to starve the sin of gluttony at its source. A little known and rather amusing manifestation of this battle was the intense scrutiny of table noises. Monastic customaries often included rules against slurping your pottage, clattering your spoon, or chewing too loudly. These weren't just matters of etiquette, they were seen as outward signs of an inward gluttonous spirit. A loud chewer was a person who was enjoying their food too much, with a sloppy, animalistic pleasure. The ideal was to eat with a quiet, detached efficiency, as if the process of eating was a slightly inconvenient necessity that you were performing with graceful resignation. This constant internal monitoring creates a state of perpetual vigilance. Every time you feel a pang of hunger, you have to ask yourself, is this a simple, physical need, or is it the sin of gluttony whispering in your ear when you see a platter of fish on Friday? Is the flicker of happiness you feel a simple pleasure? Or is it a form of worldly attachment that you should be extinguishing? This leads to a profound and still debated question among theologians and historians. Is it possible to completely separate the necessary pleasure of eating from the sin of gluttony? Can a person truly eat without any enjoyment at all, and if they do, is that a sign of holiness or a relationship with a fundamental part of being human? Some medieval ascetic thinkers argued for the complete annihilation of taste. There are stories of saints who would deliberately mix ashes or bitter herbs into their food to destroy any pleasure it might give them. They saw the sense of taste as a dangerous gateway to sin, something to be blocked and conquered. This extreme view represents one end of the spectrum. However, other, more moderate theologians argued that to completely reject the pleasure of food was to reject a gift from God. They argued that one could, and should, feel gratitude for the food provided, and that a mild, controlled sense of enjoyment was a part of that gratitude. The sin was not in the pleasure itself, but in the attachment to that pleasure. Gluttony was when the desire for the pleasure of food overshadowed the desire for God. This more nuanced view was likely the one held by most, but the tension between these two positions was always present. Where does grateful enjoyment end and sinful indulgence begin? It's a fine line, and every monk had to walk it every day. You leave the chapter house feeling spiritually exhausted. The list of 5 sins has been burned into your mind. It's like a diagnostic manual for your soul. Now, even the simplest meal is fraught with moral peril. The monastery has managed to turn a bowl of beans into a final exam for your immortal soul. That evening, you eat your pottage with a new, almost painful slowness. You chew each mouthful deliberately, trying to be neither eager nor disgusted. You try to taste nothing but sustenance. You focus on the lector's droning voice, on the image of the crucifix on the wall, on anything but the food in your mouth. You are fighting the battle against gluttony, one bland, joyless spoonful at a time. The war against gluttony is a waking battle, but you soon discover it has a second front, the world of your dreams. After a long day of prayer, work, and bland food, you collapse into your simple cot in the dormitory. The room is cold and filled with the soft sounds of other men sleeping, and as you drift off, your mind, freed from the discipline of the day, rebels. You dream of food, not the food of the monastery, never the pottage or the watery ale. You dream of the food from your past, the food of the world you renounced. You are sitting once again in that tavern from your last night of freedom. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat. A massive platter is set before you, piled high with crackling pork, juicy sausages, and dark, rich blood pudding. A loaf of soft white bread, still warm from the oven, steams as you tear it open. Date anchored of thick, sweet, strong ale is in your hand. You can feel the warmth of the fire, hear the laughter of the other patrons. It is a dream of pure, unadulterated pleasure. You reach for a piece of pork, your mouth watering with an intensity you never feel when you're awake. The dream is so vivid you can almost taste the salt on the crackling, feel the grease on your fingers. But just as you bring the morsel to your lips, the matins bell rings. Your eyes snap open. It's 2 a.m. The dormitory is dark and cold. The dream vanishes, leaving behind an almost painful sense of loss in the stomach that feels emptier than ever. The phantom taste of roast pork is still on your tongue, a cruel ghost of the pleasure you cannot have. You pull on your robe and shuffle with your brothers to the chapel for the first prayer of the day, your mind still lost in the warm, noisy world of your dream. This experience, dreaming of forbidden foods, is a well-understood psychological phenomenon for anyone on a restrictive diet. But for a medieval monk, it had a deeper, more troubling spiritual dimension. Were these dreams simply a product of a hungry body, or were they a form of demonic temptation, the subtle assault on the soul during its most vulnerable state? This question was a serious topic of theological discussion. Early Christian desert fathers wrote extensively about the temptations that came in the night, including lustful dreams and, yes, gluttonous ones. A little-known aspect of this is how they were advised to handle it. A monk who had such a dream was often encouraged to confess it, not as a sin he had committed, but as a trial he had endured. The dream itself wasn't the sin was in how you reacted to it upon waking. Did you linger on the memory, cherishing the phantom pleasure, or did you renounce it, pray for strength, and refocus your mind on God? The dream was a test, and the real action happened the moment you woke up. As the days go on, the dreams continue. Sometimes you dream of sweet things, honey cakes, candied fruits, pies bursting with berries and cream. These are the tastes of childhood feasts, of holidays and celebrations. You dream of textures you've forgotten, the crisp snap of an apple, the smooth richness of cheese, the satisfying chew of a perfectly cooked steak. Each morning, you wake with the same feeling of acute loss. The dreams are not a comfort, they are a form of torture, a nightly reminder of everything you have given up. The historical debate here centers on the psychological health of the monks. Did this constant suppression of desire, both waking and sleeping, lead to a state of serene spiritual purity, as was the goal, or did it lead to obsession and neurosis? Some historical interpretations, often leaning on modern psychology, argue that the intense focus on suppressing desire would have inevitably backfired. By making food a forbidden topic, the monastery inadvertently made it the most interesting thing in the world. The bland diet and the constant talk of gluttony would have created a mental environment where monks thought about food more, not less. The dreams were a natural, and predictable, psychological rebellion. This view suggests a population of monks who were, beneath their calm exteriors, locked in a constant, and often losing, battle with their own obsessive thoughts about food. A more traditionalist view argues that we shouldn't project our modern understanding of psychology onto the medieval mind. For these monks, the framework of sin and salvation was the primary reality. They would have interpreted these dreams not as a sign of psychological distress, but as a standard part of the spiritual warfare they had signed up for. They had tools to combat these trials: prayer, confession, penance, and the support of their community, but an opportunity to practice their faith, to strengthen their spiritual muscles by resisting the phantom temptations of the night. One night, your dream changes. You are not in a tavern. You are in the monastery's vegetable garden, but the cabbages are made of glistening, roasted meat. The turnips are perfect globes of white cheese. You reach down and pull a carrot from the earth, but it's a long, sweet pastry filled with cream. The dream is a bizarre fusion of your two worlds, the sacred and the profane, the reality of the garden and the desire of your heart. You wake up, not with a sense of loss, but with a strange sense of resignation. You realize that your mind will always be a battlefield. The world you left behind is not truly gone, it has simply moved inward, into the landscape of your dreams. The fight for your soul, you now understand, is a 24-hour job with no time off for good behavior. Months have turned into a year. You are no longer a novice. You have taken your vows, received the Fulton Sore, and your life is a predictable cycle of prayer, work, and pottage. The dreams of feasting have faded into a dull background noise. You have, for the most part, accepted your lot, and then, A wave of excitement ripples through the monastery. A messenger has arrived. The bishop is coming for an official visit. This is a huge event. A visit from a powerful church official was a major administrative, political, and most importantly for you, culinary occasion. The monastery must put on its best face, and that includes its best food. The usual rules of austerity are about to be temporarily suspended. The entire monastery hums with a new energy. The cloister is swept with extra care. The chapel is decorated with the best tapestries and candlesticks, but the real hub of activity is the kitchen and the cellarium. The cellar, usually so protective of his stores, is now flinging open chests and barrels. The abbot has given him a budget, and he is to spare no expense within reason, of course. You are assigned to help in the kitchen, and you get a front row seat to the transformation. The first thing you notice is the arrival of a cart from the nearby town, laden with supplies the monastery doesn't produce itself. There are sacks of fine white flour, the kind you've only ever dreamed of. There are wheels of sharp, aged cheese. And, most astonishingly, there is a whole side of beef. You stare at the red meat, a forbidden sight, now sitting proudly on the kitchen's main table. Of course, it's for the bishop and his retinue. But its very presence changes the atmosphere. This is the historical reality of monastic hospitality. While the monks themselves lived in austerity, they were expected to provide generously for important guests. The rule of street, Benedict itself commands it let all guests who arrive be received like Christ. This was not just about being polite. For a powerful abbey, hosting a bishop or a nobleman was an opportunity to display its wealth, influence, and good management. The quality of the feast was a direct reflection of the status of the monastery. A bland meal would be an insult to the guest and a sign of a poorly run house. You watch as the cooks, suddenly energized and creative, prepare dishes you've never seen before. The beef is turned into a rich, dark stew, simmered with expensive red wine and onions. The finest chickens are roasted on a spit, their skin basting in their own fat. The best fish from the pond, the pike and large carp, are not just boiled, but baked with a crust of herbs and breadcrumbs. And then there are the spices. The precious, locked-away spices are brought out. The air in the kitchen, usually smelling of boiled cabbage, is now fragrant with the exotic aromas of pepper, clove, cinnamon, and ginger. A special sweet pudding is being made with honey, almonds, and saffron, a spice so valuable it was literally worth its weight in gold. A fashionably weird detail from this era is the creation of subtleties, or entremets. These were elaborate, often sculptural dishes served between courses to impress guests. They could be jellies molded into the shape of a castle, or a peacock skinned, roasted, and then laid rest in its own feathers to look alive. They were pure culinary theater, designed to elicit gasps of wonder from the diners. The bishop and his party will dine in a special guest hall, or sometimes at the abbot's high table in the refectory, separated from the common monks. As a kitchen helper, you get to carry one of the platters to the doorway of the hall. You peek inside. You see the bishop in his fine robes, sitting in a carved chair. The table is covered with a white linen cloth. There are silver goblets for the wine. The sight is so far removed from your own dining experience, the bare wooden table, the single spoon, the beaker of watery ale, that it feels like you're looking into another universe. The historical debate here is about the two-tiered nature of monastic life. How did the average monk feel about this when he was eating his pottage in silence, knowing that just a stone's throw away the abbot and his guests were feasting on roast beef and spiced wine? Did it breed resentment? Some historians argue that it must have. They see this as a clear example of the hypocrisy that could exist within the church, where the leaders preached austerity for others while enjoying luxury themselves. They imagine the whispers and grumbling among the ordinary monks, who did all the work but got none of the rewards. This view paints a picture of a monastery rife with class tension and quiet discontent. Other historians argue that this is a modern interpretation. They suggest that the medieval mind was much more accepting of hierarchy. A monk would have seen the bishop as a representative of Christ and the abbot as his spiritual father. It would have seemed natural and proper for them to receive the best. The honor of the monastery was at stake, and the feast was for the institution, not for the individual. In this view, a common monk might have felt a sense of collective pride in the magnificent feast. Even if he couldn't partake in it, he helped make it happen, and its success reflected well on his home. You return to the kitchen. The smell of the feast is almost overwhelming, but you will not taste it. Your meal, eaten later with the other kitchen staff, is the same as always: pottage and bread. But tonight, it tastes different. It's seasoned with the phantom smells from the guest hall. As you eat, you hear the distant sound of laughter and cheerful conversation from the bishop's table. It's a sound you haven't heard in a year. The silence of your own table feels deeper and heavier than ever before. You are on the inside, but tonight, you have never felt more like an outsider. The bishop's visit was a fleeting glimpse into another world, a world of flavor and finery that vanished as quickly as it arrived. The monastery has settled back into its quiet, austere rhythm. The memory of the roast beef has become another phantom, like the dreams from your novice days. But just as the gray blanket of routine becomes comfortable again, the liturgical calendar offers another, more personal reprieve: a major feast day. It's Christmas. The deep, resonant toll of the bells waking you for midnight mass feels different today, less like a summons to duty and more like an announcement of joy. The chapel is aglow with more candles than you've ever seen, their light dancing on the stone walls and catching the gold threads in the special vestments worn by the abbot. The air is thick with the rich scent of frankincense. For the first time in a long time, the atmosphere in the monastery is not one of solemn penance, but of genuine celebration. And that celebration extends to the refectory. After the long morning services, you file into the dining hall for the main meal of the day. The room itself looks different. The tables are adorned with sprigs of holly and ivy, but the real change is on the platters being brought out from the kitchen. The pottage is nowhere to be seen. This is a well-documented historical fact of monastic life. On the great feasts of the year, primarily Christmas and Easter, but also Pentecost and the feast day of the monastery's patron saint, the dietary rules were relaxed. These were not considered violations of the rule, but rather a proper and sanctioned way of honoring the importance of the day. It was a theological principle. Feasting is the flip side of fasting. You cannot have one without the other. They give each other meaning. In front of you is placed a meal that would be simple in the outside world, but here it is a banquet. There is a portion of roasted goose, its skin brown and crisp. The goose, being a two-legged creature, is a permissible indulgence, but roasting it, rather than boiling it, is a rare treat. Alongside it is a spoonful of rich bread sauce, flavored with a hint of precious nutmeg, a clear sign that this is a special occasion. There's a side of roasted root vegetables, sweetened, slightly caramelized, not boiled into submission. The bread is the pan is albus, the fine white bread, usually reserved for guests and the sick. And in your beaker is not the watery small beer, but a cup of the prime amelia, the strong, dark, malty ale. You take your first bite of the goose. The combination of the rich, fatty meat, the crispy skin, and the warm spice of the sauce is an explosion of sensation. It's so intensely flavorful that you almost want to close your eyes. You eat slowly, deliberately, trying to make each bite last. This is not the hurried, guilty pleasure of 4 aged nuts or the phantom taste of a dream. This is a legitimate, communal joy. A lesser-known detail about these feast days is the temporary suspension of silence. While the lector might still read a passage relevant to the feast, in some monasteries, a degree of quiet conversation was permitted. The abbot might offer a toast, and monks could speak to their neighbors in low voices. The sudden murmur of human speech in the usually silent hall is almost as shocking and welcome as the food itself. You exchange a quiet Merry Christmas with the monk next to you, and the simple act of speaking and being spoken to feels like a gift in itself. But how far did this feasting go? This is where historians find a fascinating area of debate. The official rules allowed for a better meal, but the definition of better varied wildly from one monastery to another, and from one century to the next. In poorer, more austere communities, the feast might have been exactly as you're experiencing it, a simple roast, burdensome better ale. But historical account books from wealthy, powerful abbeys like Cluny or Street, Albans paint a picture of truly extravagant celebrations. These records show expenditures for vast quantities of expensive wine, rare spices, sugar and incredible luxury, and imported fruits. There are descriptions of multi-course meals that rivaled those of any royal court. This has led some historians to argue that for certain monasteries, the feast days became an excuse for full-blown hedonism, a complete betrayal of the Benedictine spirit of moderation. They see it as evidence of the corrupting influence of wealth and power. Other historians, however, argue for a more charitable interpretation. They contend that these feasts were not about personal indulgence, but about celebrating the glory of God in a tangible way. In the medieval mindset, to offer God a meager celebration on his most important feast day would be an insult. Extravagance in this context was a form of worship. They also point out that these feasts were often communal events that included the monastery's lay servants, tenants, and the local poor, for whom this might be the only good meal they had all year. In this view, the feast was an act of charity and community building, not just a big party for the monks. You take a sip of the strong ale. It's rich and warming, and you feel a pleasant, gentle buzz. You look around at the faces of your brothers. They're smiling. The usual masks of solemn piety have slipped, revealing the simple human pleasure of a good meal eaten in good company. For one day, you are not just soldiers in a spiritual war, but a family sharing a holiday dinner. The meal ends. The platters are cleared away. Tomorrow, the pottage will return. The silence will descend again, but the memory of this day will sustain you. It's a pinprick of light in the long, dark winter of discipline. It's a reminder that even in a life dedicated to renunciation, there are moments of grace, moments of sanctioned joy. And it makes the ordinary days, somehow, more bearable. The warmth of the Christmas feast fades, and the monastery returns to its default setting, a disciplined, orderly, and profoundly equal state of deprivation. Or so you thought. You and your brothers are all in the same boat, eating the same bland food, living by the same rules. But as you become more attuned to the subtle currents of life in the abbey, you start to notice things. Small inconsistencies, little signs that suggest the boat might be the same, but some passengers have a better seat. The focus of your suspicion is the abbot. The abbot is the absolute authority in the monastery, the father of the community who is said to hold the place of Christ. He is a figure of immense respect and power. According to the rule of Street, Benedict, the abbot is supposed to eat his meals with the guests and pilgrims in order to practice hospitality. When there are no guests, he is supposed to eat with his brother monks. A simple, humble rule. But your abbot, a stern and imposing man from a noble family, rarely dines in the main refectory. He has his own private quarters, the abbot's lodging, which is a much finer building than the common dormitory. And he often takes his meals there, citing the endless business of the monastery that requires him to entertain minor officials or local landowners. You start to wonder, what exactly is he eating in there? One day, your work assignment provides an answer. You are tasked with helping the infirmarian deliver some medicinal herbs to the abbot's private kitchen. It's a place you've never been, a small, separate kitchen that serves only the abbot and his guests. The moment you step inside, you know this is a different world. The air doesn't smell of boiled cabbage. It smells of wine, garlic, and roasting herbs. On the table, you see a small, plump bird of quail, perhaps being prepared for roasting. There's a pitcher of what is clearly undiluted red wine, not the monastery SL, and on a small wooden board, there's a wedge of soft, creamy cheese. It's a meal for one, but it's a meal of a quality you haven't seen since the bishop's visit. This is the abbot's little secret, a historical reality in many monastic institutions. While the common monks were held to the strict letter of the rule, the abbot and other high-ranking officials like the prior or the cell are often lived by a slightly different, more comfortable set of standards. This wasn't always seen as corruption, it was often justified by their status as the head of a major institution and often a significant feudal lord in his own right. The abbot had to maintain a certain standard of living to entertain guests and project the power of his abbey. His fine meal wasn't for his own indulgence, they would argue, but for the honor of the house. A fascinating and weirdly specific example of this was the misericord. As the rules against eating meat in the main refectory became stricter over the centuries, some monasteries developed a clever workaround. They built a separate dining hall, called the misericord from the Latin for mercy. Here, monks could be sent for their health for a bit of bloodletting, for example, and while recovering, they would be shown mercy in the form of meat dinners. Over time, in some less than scrupulous abbeys, the misericord became a sort of private supper club, where the senior monks would dine on meat regularly, under the flimsy pretext of convalescence, while the junior monks ate their pottage in the official refectory next door. The existence of this dietary double standard is one of the most contentious issues for historians of monasticism. Was this a widespread abuse that signaled the decay of the monastic ideal, or was it a pragmatic, if slightly hypocritical, necessity of life in a hierarchical society? The critics, oft inciting reformers who wrote scathing attacks on luxurious abbots, argue that this was a fundamental betrayal of the vow of poverty and the principle of communal life. They point to archaeological evidence from abbots' lodgings that shows remains of expensive foods, fine pottery, and wine glasses, a stark contrast to the simple wooden bowls found in the main kitchen middens. They see a clear class divide, the noble-born abbots and priors living like aristocrats, while the lower-born monks lived in austerity. On the other side of the debate, some historians argue for a more nuanced view. They contend that the abbot's role was fundamentally different from that of a common monk. He was an executive, a diplomat, and a landlord. His diet was part of his job description. They also argue that the abuses were often exaggerated by rival orders or by reformers with an agenda. They suggest that in many well-run monasteries, the abbot did live humbly and that the image of the universally fat, feasting abbot is more of a caricature than a reality. The truth, as always, likely varied enormously from one abbey to the next. You deliver the herbs and leave the abbot's kitchen, the smell of roasting quail clinging to your robe. You feel a complicated mix of emotions. It's not exactly anger, but a sort of disillusioned resignation. The perfect equality you had imagined in this place doesn't exist. There is a hierarchy here, just as they're hidden, cloaked in the language of necessity and the honor of the house. That evening, as you sit in the refectory, you look up at the high table where the abbot would normally sit. It's empty. He is dining in his quarters tonight. You take a spoonful of your pottage, the same pottage everyone around you is eating, and you realize there is a strange comfort in this shared, bland reality. Your life is hard, but it's honest. You are living the rule as it was written. The abbot might have his quail and his wine, but you and your brothers, you have this. You have the integrity of the common bowl. Years pass. The seasons turn, abbots come and go, and you have settled into the deep, quiet rhythm of monastic life. You are no longer a young monk questioning the rules, but a seasoned veteran of the cloister. You have come to accept the bland diet, even to find a certain peace in its predictability. You've heard whispers and rumors, of course, about other monasteries, tales of abbeys that have grown rich and lax, and others that have embraced reforms of extreme austerity. But your world is this world, the world of pottage and prayer. Then one day, a rare visitor arrives, not a bishop or a nobleman, but a monk from a different order, a Carthusian on a journey to a distant charter house. He is given shelter for the night, and as a senior monk, you are tasked with speaking to him. You sit with him in the guest house, and he shares a small portion of the provisions. He carries with him a piece of hard, nutty cheese and a small flask of a fiery herbal liqueur. You take a small bite of the cheese. The flavor is astonishingly complex, sharp, salty, and deeply savory. It's nothing like the simple, fresh cheese sometimes made in your own monastery estuary. Then you take a tiny sip of the liqueur. It's potent, warming your entire chest, and it tastes of mountain herbs and honey. It's like drinking a distilled forest. You ask him where such things come from. He smiles. We make them at the Grand Chartreuse, he says simply. It is part of our labor. This conversation opens a window onto a completely different aspect of monastic food production, the one that has created the most famous legends. While your monastery's ethos is all about humble self-sufficiency and the suppression of flavor, other monastic orders had turned the creation of fine food and drink into a high art and a major commercial enterprise. This is the historical origin of the popular image you once had of monks brewing fine ales, distilling spirits, and aging cheese to perfection. Your monastery follows the Benedictine rule, focused on communal living and a balanced life of prayer and varied work. But other orders had different charisems. The Carthusianes, for example, were semi-hermetic, living in individual cells and dedicating themselves to contemplation. Their manual labor often involved meticulous, detailed work that could be done in a small space, like copying manuscripts or, famously, perfecting the recipe for the complex herbal liqueur known as chartreuse. The secret recipe, said to contain 130 different herbs, is a perfect example of this specialized, scholarly approach to production. Then there were the Cistercians, a reform movement that broke away from the Benedictines. They sought a simpler, more austere life and established their monasteries in remote, wilderness locations. To survive, they became master agriculturalists. They were experts in land management, sheep farming, and, in many regions, winemaking. Many of the most famous vineyard sites in Burgundy, for example, were first developed and cultivated by Cistercian monks who meticulously studied the soil and climate to produce the best possible grapes. Their work wasn't about creating a luxury product for themselves, but about creating the best possible product from God's earth, often to be sold to support their communities. And, of course, there are the Trappistes, another branch of the Cistercian family. The image of the Trappist monk brewing strong, world-class beer is perhaps the most famous. A lesser-known detail is that for a long time, the monks themselves were not allowed to drink the strong beer they produced. They still drink a simple refectory beer, much like your own small ale. The famous, high-quality beers were brewed primarily for sale to the public to support the monastery and its charitable works. The idea that they were all sitting around enjoying their own trip, L's and quads, is a modern misconception. This commercial success leads to a significant historical debate. Did this focus on producing high-quality, marketable food and drink corrupt the monastic ideal? Critics argue that it absolutely did. They contend that when a monastery becomes a famous brand, its focus shifts from God to the marketplace. The abbot becomes more of a CEO than a spiritual father. They point to instances where monasteries became embroiled in commercial disputes, trademark battles, and the pursuit of profit. In this view, making a world-famous cheese or liqueur is a distraction from the real work of a monk, a form of worldly entanglement disguised as holy labor. However, defenders of these traditions argue that this is the very essence of the Benedictine motto, or et labore, pray and work. The labor should be done to the best of one's ability, to the greater glory of God. To make a perfect cheese is a form of prayer, a testament to the beauty of creation. They argue that the income generated from these products allows the monasteries to be self-sufficient, to maintain their historic buildings, and to engage in charity, all without being dependent on donations from wealthy patrons, which can come with their own corrupting strings attached. They see it not as a compromise, but as a model of sustainable, faith-based enterprise. You thank the Carthusian brother for his generosity. The taste of the cheese and liqueur lingers on your palate, a fleeting taste of a different kind of monasticism. You realize that the monastic diet is not one single thing. It's a whole spectrum of practices and philosophies. Your life of pottage is at one end food as fuel, flavor as a foe. The Carthusian liqueur is at the other food as a craft, a meticulous art form offered to God. You walk back to your cell under the stars. For years, you have viewed your bland food as a hardship to be endured. But now, you see it in a new light. It is your monastery's particular path, its unique interpretation of the rule. It is a path of simplicity, not of craft. There is no right or wrong path, you realize, just different ways of walking toward the same destination. Your way is the way of the empty bowl, and for the first time, you feel a sense of pride in its stark and simple integrity. You are old now. Your back aches when you stoop in the garden, and your hands, gnarled from decades of work and prayer, are stiff in the morning chill. The faces in the refectory are mostly new, young men with the same mixture of piety and apprehension you once had. You've seen abbots buried and novices professed. You have become part of the monastery's memory. Something strange has happened to your body. You no longer crave the foods of your youth. The dreams of roast pork and spiced cakes have long since vanished. The thought of a rich, fatty meal is, frankly, a little nauseating. Your body has not just adapted to the monastic diet, it has learned a new language of satisfaction, a language based on subtlety, routine, and sufficiency. This is a physical transformation that is rarely discussed but was a fundamental part of the long-term monastic experience. Decades of a low-fat, high-fiber, mostly vegetarian diet would have profoundly changed amongst physiology. Your digestive system, once accustomed to the heavier foods of the secular world, is now finely tuned to a diet of whole grains, legumes, and vegetables. A sudden, rich meal like the one served at the bishop's visit years ago would now likely cause you physical distress. You sit in the refectory, and the bowl of pottage is placed before you. You look at it not with resignation, but with a sense of familiar comfort. It is warm, it is nourishing, and it is known. There are no surprises here. In a world that is full of chaos and uncertainty, the absolute predictability of the pottage is a form of peace. You have eaten this same basic meal thousands of times. Each spoonful is a connection to all the meals that have come before, a link in an unbroken chain stretching back through your entire adult life. You've even started to notice the subtleties you were blind to as a novice. You can taste the difference between a pottage made with leeks and one made with turnips. You can detect the faint sweetness of parsnips when they are in season. Your palate, stripped of the loud flavors of salt, fat, and spice, has become incredibly sensitive to the quietest whispers of taste. It's like learning to see in the dark. At first, all is blackness, but with time your eyes adjust and you can make out shapes and shades you never knew were there. A curious, and rather poignant, detail of this physical transformation relates to the teeth. Archaeologists studying skeletal remains from medieval monastic cemeteries have often found that the monks had surprisingly healthy teeth compared to the general population, and even the aristocracy. While the sugar-rich diets of the wealthy often led to cavities and decay, the monks' low-sugar, abrasive diet of coarse bread and vegetables acted as a natural cleaner, physical testament to the unintended health benefits of a life of renunciation. Your simple, boring food has preserved your teeth. This long-term physical adaptation raises a deep and unresolved question for historians and even philosophers. Does changing the body change the soul? The entire premise of the monastic diet was that by controlling the body's appetites, you could purify the spirit. But did it work after a lifetime of this? Were you holier, or were you just used to it? One school of thought, the more spiritual or theological interpretation, would argue yes. They would say that this long, slow process of physical discipline is a true form of spiritual formation. By consistently choosing renunciation over indulgence, You have literally reshaped your desires. The fact that you no longer crave rich food is a sign of spiritual victory. Your body and soul have finally come into alignment. The physical peace you feel is a reflection of an inner, spiritual peace. However, a more skeptical or secular viewpoint might argue that this is simply a matter of habituation. The body is an adaptable machine. If you feed it the same thing every day for 50 years, it will stop wanting anything else. This doesn't necessarily signify a change in your soul. It just signifies a change in your gut microbiome and your hormonal responses to food. In this view, you haven't conquered gluttony. You've just got annulled and set in your ways. The peace you feel isn't spiritual transcendence, it's the comfort of a deeply ingrained habit. The debate hinges on whether you see the human being as a soul inhabiting a body or a fully integrated biopsychological organism. You lift a spoonful of pottage to your lips. You are not thinking about theology or history. You are simply eating your dinner. The warmth spreads through your chest. You look at the young novice across from you, who is picking at his food with a barely concealed look of distaste. You see your own past in his face. You remember the burning hunger, the desperate cravings, the feeling of deprivation. You know that he cannot understand the peace you feel now. It's a peace that cannot be explained, only earned. It took a lifetime of bland food to achieve it. Your body is old and tired, but it is, in its own way, content. It no longer fights against the rules. It has become the rules. The diet that was once your prison has, over the long, slow arc of a lifetime, become your home. The light in the refectory is soft and golden, the late afternoon sun slanting through the high arched windows. The lector's voice, reading from the Psalms, is a familiar, gentle river of sound that has flowed through thousands of your meals. It is no longer a drone, but a kind of music. You hold your spoon, its wooden handle worn smooth and dark from the grip of your hand over countless years. You are not just in the monastery. Its stones are in your bones. Its stones are in your bones. Its silence is in your soul. You look down into your bowl. Its pottage, of course. Today, it has a greenish tint from the cabbage and parsley harvested this morning. You see the familiar shapes of barley and lentils. There is a piece of your daily bread next to the bowl, dark and dense. This is the landscape of your life. It is a simple, unchanging vista, and you have come to love it with a quiet, steady affection that is deeper than any youthful passion. You no longer think in terms of what the food is not. You no longer compare it to the feasts of your memory or your dreams. The ghost of roast pork has long been exorcised. Your meal is no longer defined by absence but by presence, the presence of sustenance, the presence of community expressed in the shared, silent ritual, the presence of a discipline that has held you and shaped you, giving your life a form and a purpose. You take a spoonful. The taste is clean and earthy. It is the taste of the garden soil you have tilled, of the rain that has fallen on the monastery fields. You are, quite literally, tasting your own life's work. There is an integrity to it, a wholeness, that you know is a rare and precious thing in the world outside these walls. You dip your bread into the stew, the coarse loaf softening in the warm liquid. It is a perfect partnership, bread and pottage, work and prayer, body and soul. A curious little detail you've come to appreciate is the seasonal rhythm, not just of the ingredients, but of the meal times themselves. In the winter, the single main meal was eaten earlier, in the mid-afternoon, to conserve light and heat. In the summer, with its long days of labor in the fields, a second, lighter supper was often added in the evening. Your own body has become a calendar, sensing the subtle shifts in the dietary clockwork that governs this place. This deep attunement to the seasons is a form of wisdom that the outside world, with its rush and its constant, artificial light, has largely forgotten. The great historical debate that has framed your entire life was the monastic diet, a noble spiritual exercise, or a form of oppressive deprivation seems, from this vantage point, to be a false choice. It was both. It was a deprivation that, through discipline and time, became a source of spiritual strength. The emptiness of the stomach was meant to create a space for God, and for you, after a lifetime of practice, it has. The blandness that once felt like a punishment now feels like a purification. It has cleansed your palate, not just of flavors, but of desires. Was this the intended outcome for everyone? You know it was not. You have seen brothers struggle their entire lives, their faces tight with a resentment that never faded. You have seen others who followed the rules with their bodies, but whose hearts remained in the world of feasts and flavors. And you have seen some who broke, quietly leaving the monastery in the dead of night to return to a world they found they could not live without. The rule was a vessel, but not every man was able to fill it. The ultimate question, which historians can never truly answer because it is a question of individual souls, is what percentage of monks truly found peace in this system, and what percentage only found suffering. There are no account books for the human heart. The meal is over. The final prayer is said. You rise with the others, your old joints protesting slightly. You file out of the refectory, your hands tucked into the sleeves of your robe. You walk through the cloister, the covered walkway that forms the square heart of the abbey. The arches frame a small garden, green and peaceful in the fading light. You have walked this path 10,000 times. Your feet know the slight dip in the flagstones by the third arch. You have lived a life of repetition, a life where every day is almost the same as the one before. To your younger self, this would have seemed like a prison, but to you now, it is a freedom from the constant, exhausting demand for novelty. It is the freedom of a river that flows in a deep, well-worn channel. It knows where it is going. You look down at your hands, at the spoon you still hold. It is just as simple to love wood. Your bowl is just a simple dish of clay. Your food is just a simple stew of beans and grain. But in this simplicity, you have found a richness you could never have imagined in the noisy, colorful, chaotic world of your youth. In a lifetime of eating terrible food, you have, against all odds, found yourself perfectly and peacefully fed. The sun has set now. The last bell for Compline has rung, its final, gentle note fading into the deep blue of the twilight. The day is done. You walk slowly back to the dormitory, the cool night air a comfort on your skin. The other brothers are shadows moving in the dim light of a few scattered candles, their movements slow, their presence a quiet comfort. There is no need for words. After a lifetime together, the silence is a language of its own, full of shared history and mutual understanding. You lie down on your simple cot, the straw rustling softly beneath you. It is the same bed in the same room where you first dreamt of forbidden feasts so many decades ago. But tonight, your mind is quiet. There is only a profound stillness, a sense of peace that settles over you like a soft, warm blanket. The hunger that once drove you, the craving for something more, has finally been satisfied, not by food, but by the slow, steady rhythm of a life lived within the quiet embrace of these stone walls. The discipline that once felt like a cage has become the very structure of your freedom. You close your eyes, and there is no battle to be fought. There is only rest. The gentle sounds of your brother's breathing fill the room, a soft chorus of life at peace. And as you drift away, you feel yourself becoming part of the great, silent sleep of the monastery itself, a single note in a long and patient prayer.